All right, good morning and hello, or I guess whatever time it is. Hello there, and welcome everybody to, I guess this is episode number 9. Today it's going to be, it looks like me, Jason Story, and Andrew from Infinity PBR. We're going to be talking about game development. Yeah, pretty much just talking about game development. And yeah, happy Mother's Day to everybody out there who celebrates Mother's Day. A little bit of chat about that already going on. So welcome, guys. We were chatting a little bit before call, and I guess just wanted to say hello and hi to everybody out in chat. I don't know how to introduce that any better. Oh, look, my autofocus is working though now. I'm back in focus again. Finally figured
Nice.
that out. Drove me nuts last week. Anyway, yeah, how have you guys been?
Been good. Making games, making progress. I like many others, probably took a step back and decided, I need to redo some stuff. So in the game I'm working on, I was trying to add some new stuff, and I was like fighting myself. I realized that the stuff I made a year ago, when this whole lockdown thing first started, and I got really inspired to make a game, like many others, I was like, I need to redo this and that and this other thing. And I was like, ooh, no, that means I need to go back to the beginning. And so I kind of restarted from scratch, pulling the pieces that I liked, not and getting rid of their stuff. Basically massive refactoring, but it's working out, so I'm happy with that.
Interest. So this is like of your project's code, your game's code. Can you share what your game is with everybody, just so everybody who hasn't seen it yet and is new to stream can get an idea of what it is you're talking about?
Yeah, there's no website for it yet. Well, there is, but it's a parked page. It's called Legend of the Stones. That's what I'm calling it, and it's a party-based role-playing game. Similar, maybe in aesthetic, not visual graphics quality and whatnot, but to the old Might and Magic 6, 7, 8 games. Not the heroes of Might and Magic, but the regular Might and Magic, where you walk around solving quests and puzzles and fighting monsters with a party, rather than like a first-person view where you see your arms. You rather just see your little portraits, and you just have your party that you build up and stuff. So role-playing game, big world. Lots of stuff going on, but that makes it much more complicated than, Flappy Bird.
Right. That's interesting. So you're doing a big refactor on that, it sounds like.
Yeah. That's, I decided I wanted to keep myself accountable to myself. And I know I'm not the best coder. I'm still learning a lot. I'm taking, your courses. I'm learning a lot from other people. And what I decided to do was create what I wanted for myself if I was not coding it myself. And that's for Infinity PBR stuff. I've been creating these little game modules, just small bite-sized pieces of code that are really flexible. And I'm doing it for my own project because I realize if I do that, then it forces me to do a good job, to make sure I'm clean about it, to make sure I go back and fix things. And it takes longer, to get the game going, for sure. And like in this case, going back practically to the beginning, basically going back to the title screen and saying, okay, I need to redo this from the start. I didn't have to redo every single line of code or anything, but I did have to rethink how I set everything up, how I set up all my classes, my player character, and all of those objects. But the end result is going to be a much tighter project that is smaller. This can be less code, cleaner code, more efficient code, and I think more flexible, so that as I add things, because I'm going to add things as I go along. There's no way I know everything I'm going to put in the game right now. I'm going to add things as I go, and hopefully as I add things, it doesn't cause a problem, forcing me to go back and redo, cascades of things just because I add one small little feature.
Yeah, that's the ideal. Do you have, since you just recently did this, do you happen to have anything fresh in your mind of like a specific thing that you needed to refactor to make easier, like a specific system or set of code or something that was an important one that you refactored? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah. So why did I end up going down that rabbit hole? I was working on I'm working on an inventory system, a visual inventory system, and I've got that module working well, and I think it works, but I was adding it to my own game in order to just dog food it and make sure that I can implement it into an existing project, which is what other people would end up doing. And in that process, I realized that the entire way I set up my menu system needed to be changed. The inventory is part of the menu system, and the whole menu system just wasn't that. It worked, but it wasn't the best. So I realized I need to change that. And then with that, I also realized, hey, if I change this menu system, I also need to change. I've got an object called required objects that do not destroy on load, so that it stays with you during the game. And I realized that some of the things I really should be in there, like the menu system, weren't in there. And I was like, okay, I need to add these different things into this one master object. And then I realized, oh, wait, if I do that, I need to change this and that. And it was just a whole slew of code. So the big thing was going back to the beginning and making sure that when the game starts, no matter what scene you're in, but particularly in the title screen, that one object that has all the character data on it. At the beginning, it's just going to create your base start party. So if you don't load data into it, it's just going to be like, hey, here's your new game. Now customize your characters. And that one object needed to be just completely reworked and separate things out. Like it embarrassed me to say so, not too much though, that when I looked at some of the scripts, there was one called like player actions, which had player actions, key actions, magic actions, all these different things. It was just everything thrown in there because as I was building, I was like, oh, let me just throw this here. But really, they should have been separated out. And so I'm going through and separating those out. And then the other thing was just loading the game data itself into a new scene. So whenever a new scene is loaded, how do I load all that data in? That was on the scene side, and now I'm moving that into the controller side so that it's handled by this one object that says, hey, a new scene was loaded. Now do all these things. Where before it was very 5 different things doing 5 different things each, basically.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I was just kind of curious, and I think it's useful for everybody else to kind of understand what you're doing there and why you would want to go back and refactor it. 'Cause I think a lot of people start off that way too, where everything's just kind of, especially in the beginning, like just duplicated in each scene, and then it loads up and then it runs, and then you start running into problems when you want to go across scenes, and then when you want to start adding in your new systems and stuff, shit just starts to fall apart. So yeah, it makes sense. That's good stuff. That's interesting.
Well, one of the biggest problems that people have when they're doing that, though, is the general concept of encapsulating state. So when you say, for example, you're working on something and you make a change and like 10 things break, that's usually because something you were doing, like some object that you're describing, is sort of has other things inside of it. Like you're saying this dot this dot this dot this. And so when something changes, it changes all of those different components. So as you start to architect things and refactor them, one of the best things you can do is it's called encapsulating state. And so for an example of this, I made a thing earlier that's basically an electric door that can open and close and lock and unlock and whatever. And I added the concept of power. So you can apply a power source to a door, and you can unplug the power source, and then it stops working, and then you can't unlock it anymore or lock it until you reapply the power source. Now, that power source could conceptually be something I could expose on the door as like door.powerSource or whatever. But if I encapsulate the state, I give the door a power source, and the door uses a power source to make decisions, but it's not exposed outside of the door. So in that way, any changes I make to the power source, if I switch from constant power source to a battery-powered power source, the door doesn't change, if that makes sense, right? Because it's an internal decision made by the door. And I'm similarly going to add damage to the door at some stage, so the door can be damaged, and then at certain levels of damage, you can't open it anymore, you can't close it. But that's not going to affect the outward experienced properties of a door, which can open and close, or if it's able to, can open and close, or whatever. And so, yeah, that's basically whenever you have issues with refactoring, that's usually the problem, is when you stop and you change one thing and go, 5 things just broke, because they know that I changed that. I changed a word inside of a class, and because other people are referencing it, then it's causing me issues. So as you start doing the stuff that we were talking about before, where instead of saying player.inventory, you could say player.add-to-inventory. And then if you change how the inventory works inside the player, then that doesn't affect anything else, because the player.add-to-inventory is still the same contract to everybody else in the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's a lot of what I've been trying to do. I think if I'm hearing you correctly, it really making things be responsible for less stuff. So they really are doing as little as possible often, and not having to worry about everything else. So a simple example is the time of day. You know, what time of day it is. The time progresses. So I've got a daytime script that just keeps track of what time it is, and that's all it does. And it's got some methods on it that'll spit out the, you know, human readable date, what month it is, and all that. So now the one bit of, you know, UI on the screen that tells you what date it is, all it has to do is call this one script and one method, basically what's the date, full date, you know, and write the full date to the UI, and it does nothing else. So before, I had that date time was kind of built into another game control class. So whenever I change anything there, I risked changing my date time stuff, and then that would affect all these other things that really just didn't care about what I was changing. And so I just need to separate it out.
Yep. I mean, again, another example that specifically with that door thing I showed, there's 3 doors, and one of them in the middle has a little LED indicator screen, which like shows whether it's open or closed. That's something that I added later as a visual thing to that door, but it didn't change the door because conceptually, just because it like visually changes, it doesn't affect the door, right? That's in the same. So separating out the like representation of your data in terms of how the time of day is displayed separately from the data itself gives you a lot of flexibility to just do multiple different views of that information.
There's the video of the one you were talking about actually playing.
Yeah.
Got that figured out finally. Trying to get it working. I just got it up there and linked it too, so everybody can see.
As another fun little side note too, that's the way I do the UI for stuff like this. This is only for debugging. It's obviously not for anything fancy. But this is a good example of the factory pattern and the command pattern, because I have this thing called a security system, and a security system has things you can do. A security system can register doors and then turn them on, turn them off, and equip them, or do different things like lock them all or unlock them all or whatever. And long story short, I created a factory that knows how to make commands out of a security system, and so it creates commands like open door or close doors or lock doors or turn them off, turn them on. And then I have an array of these commands, and I pass that to the UI. So the UI, I didn't drag those buttons in or do anything. I just said, these are the commands that can happen right now in relation to doors. And then for each command, draw a button, give it a name, and put a bit of color on it. And so every command encapsulates what it's doing. So as I added or removed commands, that little bar at the bottom just changes and adds the new buttons. So as a general rule, if you can migrate away from manually hard coding that stuff and structuring it in terms of commands, you end up finding that you have a lot more flexibility for your designs.
Yeah, I find it hard to see. There aren't a lot of good, I guess, code examples with games that I think show how to do that. At least not that I've seen. So it might be a good thing to actually do some videos on. I don't know. Anyway. So you guys, I don't know what we didn't have any specific topics to really talk about today. So talk a little bit about refactoring and stuff. I don't know if you guys wanted to jump into anything specific or talk about just questions that the audience has and the people watching have. I know a couple have popped up, but I don't know if there's anything you guys were specifically interested in. And I'm pretty open and flexible today to whatever you guys want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, we get so many requests to answer questions that we end up skipping once we go on the big long rants in our previous ones. So I think maybe we'll just answer questions for people. That might cover some of the stuff we've missed in the past.
Just had lots of questions. Yeah, let's do that. Let's we'll call this the Q&A episode, right? So we can just get started with the first question here, which is this one I really have no advice for, but since you're on here, Jason, maybe you do, about how you would go about getting a game development job overseas. I assume this is going to be, someone trying to get from one internationally, I guess.
I get that question a lot because people say, "Oh, you're in Ireland, which is middle of nowhere, where there's no real tech stuff at the moment, and yet somehow you're working with people all around the world in different countries." And they kind of think there's some magic trick I know, some solution to getting those kinds of jobs. The truth is, we live in a pretty connected world. I didn't actively seek out jobs in any country in any particular kind, and the kinds of work we do tends to be doable anywhere in the world. So fundamentally, I just met a lot of people. I'm in a lot of communities. I talk to a lot of people. It's enough opportunities get thrown at the wall that eventually some of them are worth taking, and I do them. So the short answer is I haven't tried to get a job overseas. I just tended to be around and available, and then once people want work from me, I would accept it. So I've said this kind of example before. I'm probably not the right person if you want an industry kind of job, but if you're just looking for work, there's no need to kind of look for a specific job. Just find places where people need things done. There's tons and tons of communities of people who, they're artists with no programmers, or they're programmers with no artists, and they need help. Oftentimes they won't pay you very much, but you can leverage that at the start by doing some either free or cheap work, and then eventually they'll have to want to pay you. And I know people who started like that. Like there's a guy who's making a game I know who paid $500 for the entire soundtrack to his game, but that was like a jumping off point for this guy to have a portfolio of stuff, where he's now charging like, what, it's 10 times that just to make soundtracks for games, because he's now gotten good at it. So it's one of those things, you just have to do work for people, and eventually you'll be good enough at it that people want to pay you more. And there's no real like shortcut, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wish I had some advice there, but I think, yeah, outside of just networking and talking to people, and like you said, just doing stuff and making, providing some value out there. Like when you, like you said, when people hire you, like at low rates, a lot of the time later on as they grow, you get something better, or they'll introduce you to somebody who's got something better. Just as you go, and that's happened for me a lot too. Just a lot of it's just at meetups and stuff. Doesn't really meet with international or anything. Let's go on to here, a question from a 16-year-old. 16-year-old, and I love programming and seeing it. So are there any tips to help me? I'm beginning. I'm gonna try any game you made. So is that good? Obviously, yeah. I say definitely, like, making a game is definitely a good thing to do. Go through the beginner tutorial and a bunch of other ones, and then start making your own games. And the biggest piece of advice that I've got is just build stuff constantly. Either make games that are small, simple, and easy to kind of complete at first, so that you can actually just kind of like knock them out and actually be finishing things. But it also, like, if you love programming, find other problems that you can solve with code and just start solving them to get used to that as kind of a habit. Like, anything that you can solve by writing a little bit of code, see if you can, find the solution by writing code. It's like I think the best way to learn and the best way to get good at it. But I don't know. What do you guys think for somebody young learning how to write code, or just learn who likes to code?
Yeah, just keep doing it and complete, like someone in the chat said, complete small complete projects. So basically finish what you start, like have a small idea that's really achievable for you at your stage, and that's going to expand over time, right? At the beginning, you might think, okay, I can make, a simple game where you have to find, hidden objects or something. That's easy enough. Do that. And then from there, figure out what you want to work on next. And that's going to keep expanding as you get better. And in each of these things, learn what you did right, learn what you did wrong, put them out there on, Android and whatnot, put them out there on iOS. If they get accepted, great. If they don't, oh, well. If they make you a few bucks, great. That's a few bucks. Don't expect to get rich from it right away. But I mean, I think that's I wasn't 16 when I started with Unity. I was much older, but that's essentially what I did. I was using a tutorial, and at one point during the tutorial, I was like, I can make my own game, because I realized that I knew enough, not well, but I knew enough to make my first little game, and I did that. Put it up on the iOS App Store. Unfortunately, I used a trademark to name it, turns out, so I got it taken down within a month. But in that 1 month time, I had a game that was published, and I was already working on my next project, which was a small puzzle game, and another project which wasn't a game at all, but just a little meme generator type thing. And after that, after those 3 projects, I said to myself, ooh, I know enough now to work on my big project. Took 2.5 years, but so I probably didn't know enough. But the idea of just continually making new stuff, continually learning how to make different projects with different problems and different solutions will get you to the point where you finally are going to say to yourself, hey, that game that's been kicking around my head for the past who knows how long, I can make that now. And then you can do and make your dream project.
Yeah, and have a bit of empathy for people who are new, right? Let's look at two common scenarios that people feel when they're getting started. People say, "Oh, I want to make games. How do I make games?" And one of the first common things you're going to hear is, "Do game jams." Game jams are a great way to get started. But if you're being honest with yourself, sometimes you can look at that and go, "Well, that sounds hella scary. I've never done a game jam before. I can't, make an entire game in like 2 days. I had never made one game. How could I do it in like a couple days?" Well, that might not be the way to start for you, but that's fine. The other alternative is people say, "Okay, well, I'll just start following courses and following along." The problem with doing it that way is if you follow a course along, you often end up with a very you don't learn how to copy and paste. It's the classic, like, you haven't read the idea. Finally, the third one is, I'll make my dream game. I'll write down all these, I'll jump from project to project. And the problem is, because you just do the first 5%. It's trying to make a dinner, and you only ever get to the first part of preparing the ingredients, and you keep stopping and doing the next preparing ingredients. You never actually make your way through to the finish line, and there's so much you never learned how to do. So people get really frustrated with it, but the truth is, even the smallest game you can imagine is more complicated than you think it is. So just pick Snake, pick Tetris, pick something, and step one, just try to recreate it. Learn why the decisions were made the way they were, and then when that's done, try to make it better or different, because then you can learn about game design by taking an existing game and modifying it and changing it. So if you feel like, oh, making Snake is boring, it's just moving a thing around, well, then that's your challenge. Make it fun. Learn to make the Snake first, then learn to make it fun. Don't just immediately say, but I want to make the next Skyrim. Well, if you can't make Snake fun, you shouldn't even try to make Skyrim. So first, try to solve that problem first. And honestly, it's not that hard. The hardest part is sticking with it, learning to actually finish the project. So force yourself to stick with the smallest goal and make that goal achievable.
Yeah, solving.
Yeah,
going over those hurdles. You're gonna get stuck from time to time, right? With something that just you can't figure out. And sometimes you just need to take a nap and come back to it. Other times you need to move on to something else and come back in a week or two. But just getting through those humps is going to be key for anyone learning out.
Yeah, there was a great talk. I think it was it Jack Conte or someone? Somebody said something once that really resonated with me. They said it's very easy to do something on a good day. The real test is a bad day, and it's like if you say, I want to make a game, well, of course you want to make a game, because making a game is the fun thing. That's why we're all here. But it's only fun when it's fun. At some point, it will stop being fun. There will be a wall. There will be a problem. And the question becomes, what do you do when that happens? Do you give up and move on to another fun project? And that's when everyone says, oh, no, I'm still working on games. I dropped to that game. I'm moving over to this game. No, you're not. What you've done is you hit your first hurdle onto a different project because it's easier. Because the part where it's all ideas and possibility is the easy part. The part where you have to turn the possibility into a real thing, that's the hard part, and that's the part you have to actually. If you're trying to make a game, ask yourself, if you were working on Skyrim and something goes wrong, will that make your day worse than working on Snake and something goes wrong? And so for me, I would like the worst day to be a better day. So I would pick the easier, worst day, if that makes any sense.
I thought that was all solid advice. And there's problems that everybody hits, so I don't think I could put it any better. The next question that popped up was just about scriptable event system architecture and using scriptable objects for more than just read-only data.
I know a guy who's got a course on that. Do you know anybody, Jason, who might be good at talking about that sort of stuff?
It's one of the things that I've been talking about recently and talk about a bit in courses and stuff in general. It does have there's certainly a possibility of making it super messy. I think, like with anything, you can get really wild and messy and go completely overboard, and you start to hook up everything with it. I mean, I've seen people do the same with just Unity events and try to build their entire game just linking everything with Unity events, like the entire, or like building everything in a scriptable or not scriptable, visual scripting system. And I think that either of those are complete extremes and a terrible, like a terrible risk, right? It's a danger too, but it doesn't mean that I wouldn't use the systems like where they make sense. still use visual scripting systems where they make sense, and Unity events, and then scriptable objects too, for sending off the types of events where they really, I guess, fit well and work well with designers. Yeah. So I don't know, like, how much do you use scriptable objects just in your like day-to-day stuff, Jason?
I don't, to be honest. I think we talked about this before. I use scriptable objects as a way of persisting in application state. So I use it for, that's it. And I kind of draw a boundary line and say, if it's a repository of items, it is where the player's information is stored. But I don't use it for any of the other sort of fancier stuff people use it for, like for custom inspector stuff or for event systems or whatever. I tend to just use it literally as a in-memory database and then save to it and from it from text files, and then that gets exposed as a repository to the rest of the system.
That's another really strong use for them too. Just being able to serializing out that data and then saving all the data there, and then being able to load it up and view it in the inspector. The things that's really nice about it is like you get that data there, and even without any inspector tools, you can still see the data, right? But you can make custom tools and see it a whole lot easier without having to do something external or build some file viewer or go in and look at the JSON data or something.
Yeah, one of the first problems people tend to have when they first start using Unity is the question of, if I load a scene, if I go from the main menu to the first level, to the second level, to the third level, how do I share information across that? And the truth is, you have to save it. You have to save out the information, load the next scene, and load in the information. You can either do it manually by using some intermediary bit like player prefs or a file, or you can use a scriptable object, which is basically doing that for you. It is serializing the data automatically and kind of automagically as you run. So if you change data in a scriptable object, it will persist from scene to scene to scene. That being said, it doesn't save the changes through play. So if you had like levels unlocked, and then as you play your game, you unlock new levels. If you close the game and open it again, the scriptable objects are back to whatever level they were at 0 when it started. So they're useful for in-memory saving of the game's the status. It's kind of like the RAM on your computer. So effectively, as your game runs,
you're not hitting the disk, you're not leaving it off.
Exactly, yeah. And then at some point, when you're about to close the game or you're going to do something else, that's where you take that scriptable object and you take its current state and dump it to a file. And then when the game loads up again, you load that back into the scriptable object, and then you kind of live with the scriptable object again from that point on.
And the nice thing there is you can dump that straight into JSON and then put it wherever you want. Right? You can make it a local file, cloud save, send it up to a web service, or however you want to store it, and then restore it, back when they log in.
I've been using them for mostly, actually, probably only for storing, data, like anything that I need to look up later. So, huge lists of all the stats about an item that's not going to change. At least, if I equip a sword, what's that sword? Well, I can just pull the item data from the scriptable object, and then from that point on, it lives in my data, and it gets passed around and cloned back and forth as it moves from system to system or inventory to the world or whatnot. But it's helpful for not only just storing that data and having it all in one single place, whether it be that or other things like magic spells. But I also like the idea that I can then create different like difficulty levels pretty easily, where I just copy one and change some of the values around, and suddenly my enemies are stronger. So I could say, okay, hey, choose your difficulty level of the game, and now I'm just going to reference a different scriptable object that has just slightly different data than the others. And I don't need to do any fancy computation in the code itself. It's just going to reference a different base set of data. And so now the game's harder, simply because of that.
And what's cool about that, as a side note, is people talk about design patterns and what they are without realizing it. That's specifically a pattern called the Flyweight Pattern. That's what you're doing. You're using a shared unit of information. It's like saying how all orcs have the same that they'll have the same basic concept of like a name or whatever clan they're part of. So rather than having the same 5 guys instantiate a new clan and set its name and set its clan ID and its clan banner and all that stuff, you create a clan banner or a clan, and then everyone gets the same clan, and you're referencing the same information. And then if that changes in one location, it changes for everybody magically by the proxy fact that there is one and they all happen to be referencing the same one. And so there's less memory used, there's less performance concerns, and it's easier to work with. So if you've got like a shared unit of stuff, that's exactly a perfect use case for it.
Sorry, I just writing that down as a note. I should do a video on that. This flyweight pattern in general with scriptable objects. Like I guess I use it so much that like I don't even think about it. Like I don't even think about it as a pattern or as like a thing that like people should probably
in fact, you have a video on the humble object pattern, and it's like 3 years old, but like same as me. I mean, you use that like every day. It's one of those things that people, I don't think they realize how much it's like a default of how we work in Unity.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to add that in. On my list of videos to shoot. Because they're really good. It's really useful too. It's probably the biggest use for, like, out of all things for scriptable objects. It's by far the thing that gets used, or the way it gets used the most. And it's the way that I used them for the first many, many years. It was the only thing that I did with them. So let's see what else we got for questions. Unless you guys had more on that. Scriptable objects. All right, let's see. So what else we got here? Okay, yeah, this is an interesting one. So this one you might have some thoughts on. So they're fairly new to programming and game programming in general, want to have a strong foundation. So for that reason, they're learning C++, SDL, Sfml. I'm not sure what Sfml is. Am I wrong to do that? Now, in my opinion, that depends a lot. If you're not using it, I wouldn't spend too much time on it. If you're going to use, like, if you're not going to use it, I would still be fine studying it, understanding C++, and getting kind of a brief primer on it. But if you're not going to actually use it somewhat recently going forward, and you're going to be using something else, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time and energy on it, only because you'll get rusty with it and forget it all. At least that's what happens to me. And I would focus a lot on the stuff that you're actually using. But I think that it's good to have a lot of exposure to like a wide variety of different programming languages, even at a base level, and just understand how they work and what the differences are. And with game programming, C++ specifically, I think it is a great one, like, to include in that list of stuff, to have at least some base understanding, be able to read a project, understand how it kind of comes together, how it flows, compile it, and at least be at that level. But I wouldn't, like I said, spend too much of my energy on it. I don't know. What do you think, though, Jason or Andrew? What are you guys thinking?
When I was a kid, I wanted to learn the saxophone because I was watching The Simpsons and they play the saxophone. It seemed really cool. And so my mom went to the store and they said, "Oh, if you want to learn the saxophone, you got to play the clarinet first. That's being saxophone a lot easier." And so they got me a clarinet and clarinet lessons, and I did not want to play the clarinet. I wanted to play the saxophone. So after a few months of that, I stopped and I didn't play either of them. I don't know if that analogy works with coding, but if you're not going to enjoy what you're doing, if you're not going to be making use, if learning this other thing is not what you actually want to do, then you're far less likely to follow through and finish learning.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and in my case, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I consider my case a bit more unique, just because for me, everything I've ever learned has had some value in my career, and so I find it very hard to ever think something's not valuable. And it's just a life philosophy. I've just learned that there's stuff I hated doing. Like, I absolutely, like, when I was in college, I hated databases. Like, not just a little bit, I despised it. Like, it was the most annoying, worst part of the system. It was this stupid normal form stuff. I hated them, and I just had no skill for it. And I was getting, like, it's such a weird contrast that I was getting 95s and 98% in my Java class, and I was getting 40s in my database class, and I just didn't care. I just wasn't invested in that at all. But as time went by, the amount of systems I've worked on in my life now, which have been enterprise scale, and I've had the fact that I knew this stuff like saved me months of my life. And it's gotten to the point now in situ learning how to do database stuff when it's actually mattering, when it's like saving and loading actual data that's really used by a company to like generate graphs and charts on a page. It made me appreciate the thing a lot more, because it wasn't just this arbitrary solving it for a lesson. It was me solving a technical problem. And so I realized, oh, the information was valuable. It just wasn't interesting the way it was shown to me. And so I've learned that I don't judge the quality of information anymore. I judge the quality of how it's presented. And so I found most things are worth learning. They're just, there's almost nothing you will learn that will be a detriment to you. At best, you've learned not to do something. Like that's still additional beneficial information. So the short answer is, should I not do X? Well, no, learn it and learn other stuff and learn everything else. Learn as much stuff as you possibly can. And that's, so yeah, I mean, whether you should learn it first, that might be a different question. But like, if you're enjoying doing something and it is vaguely related to programming, you'll find value in it. Even if it's not literally the lines of code, the lessons you learn about the design and the architecture and the problem solving will still apply, whether it's a game or a piece of software,
Yeah, just don't let that limit you or stop you too, like the clarinet, right? Like if you find that you don't like it, don't just stop programming because you decided that you didn't do the C++ thing and didn't like that, so that it's not a fit for you. Just switch on to the next thing. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there, and yeah, you don't need to know C++. You don't need to know any specific language to know how to code. And lots of people know how to code in a single language that I couldn't write a single line of code in. So
like, yeah, like and just like, if that wasn't clear, what I meant was like, I'm not saying that, and as a surprise, databases were valuable to learn. Sure, that was the outcome. But the point was, I didn't learn them in college that well. I still like only got a D because it was boring and I hated it. But the point was, I didn't let that stop me doing programming. I just moved on to cool, fun game stuff. And then over time, getting better at that and enjoying that means I respected the database stuff more. But yeah, I mean, I made a point of working on stuff that I enjoyed doing. So, I mean, yeah, I guess I 100% agree. Like, don't look at something and go, I'm going to force myself through this if I hate doing it. Like, if you're trying to make a career out of this or do something that you enjoy, like, find an element of it that you'll enjoy. And if you're having trouble doing that, find something you want to make and make make that the part that's fun, Like one or the other, either enjoy the process or have something so exciting that you want to make that you're worth going through the pressure to make the object.
I think that's good advice too. This one seems like a good question for Andrew. Can you guys share some tips on swapping art after prototyping is done? So like after you put in all your placeholder junk and you're ready to do something nice, like any tips?
I learned a valuable lesson early on when I made my game The Barbarian, which originally was all art from the Asda store, but I swapped it with my own stuff when I started producing stuff with Infinity PBR. Like any character or really object should not be itself the model. Like let's say you have a barrel. That barrel should just be almost just an object with a transform, maybe a couple scripts on it. That's it. And then underneath that should be the actual model, the actual prefab of the barrel, so that when you change the barrel out, you don't have to change your object out. All you have to change is the mesh. All you have to change is the model itself, and all those prefabs that are the barrel in your game are not going to be affected. It's only going to change just the mesh and nothing else, and you have to go back and redo everything. So basically, start by assuming that every single model you have, and this probably is the same for in many cases 2D assets as well, is itself a child of its parent, and the parent is what you're really bringing into the game and manipulating and moving about.
Yeah, and you can apply the same thing from the code as well. So if you again, I'm going to use the door because it's literally the thing I just did right before this call, so it's stuck in my head. A door is a thing that can open and close. And in the example in that video, it's an animation. I'm using just a standard boring animation. It opens and closes. And it's using ProBuilder. This is just, I made a rectangle, I applied an animation, it ProBuilder animates up and back. It's nothing fancy. But here's the thing. The code for that is door.open, door.close. And internally, it's using an animator to do a thing, do some stuff, animate some stuff. So if I want to change this later to either be models of different things, or not models, but instead I want to use a tween instead of using an animation, I can do that in the door class, and everyone else in the world from the rest of my system's concerns is still going to call door.open, door.close. They don't care how that implementation happened. So not only is it a good idea to separate out the models, and again, I do exactly what you said a second ago, which is I have a door, and then underneath that there's a model object, and the model object is the renderer, and then I animate the model object underneath the door so that it's not going to cause any issues with everything else. So I could swap out just the model, and that door piece would change, but the rest would work. Or I could swap out the entire door logic, and then the door class won't change. So again, it's different layers of drawing the abstractions. So.
Yeah, actually, to talk about doors, in working in my environment, my medieval environment town pack, the doors, the way we set up the doors, which do open and close, is that we're not actually opening and closing the doors themselves. We're opening and closing, basically moving the rotation of their parent. So the parent object is being rotated, open and closed, but all the different doors are arbitrary meshes that they're all children. You can turn one off, one on, and throw in a new one, and it will open and close just like the rest, because you're not actually animating the door, you're animating the parent of the door, which itself is like the child of another, larger door object. But that way, when you want to change the door, you can just change the mesh, and you don't have to change any other code, any other links, any other references. The mesh is completely separate from every little other part of that door object, including all of its code. That's the environment right there. So
Andrew's stuff is always way more fancier than mine. As you can see, mine's rectangles. He's got actual nice stuff going on.
Yeah, so this door so this door opens, but that entire door object has, I think, 9 different doors themselves. It has like 9 different outside arches, but all we're doing is calling open door one place, and it opens the parent of all those other doors, including the hinges attached as children of them and all that. So you don't have to, all you have to do is turn them on or off, and you can change the model without actually changing the object and how it interacts with the code. Yep. I think you're muted, Jason.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm just nodding. Don't worry.
That's me. I'm muted. Yeah, I was just saying that, the art stuff always just looks awesome whenever I see Andrew's stuff up there. So I just had to pop it up there and show it so everybody could see the door he's talking about and what they look like.
You know what? I'm pretty sure I have that. I might rob that door and put it into my little demonstration, because it's nicer than mine.
Do it.
Just start swapping them in. It's always fun just grabbing assets and making your video dramatically better, like instantly. And your thumbnail gets better and everything else just because you grabbed an asset pack.
I've been building up my YouTube channel and presence and playing with different thumbnails, and I find over and over again, and of course this is completely logical and makes sense, but pretty thumbnails translate to more people clicking and watching, regardless of the content. And that concept is going to go across everything we do. And I think not just game dev, that's everything. But if your game looks good, then it's going to get more eyeballs. It doesn't matter how good of the game is. It could be the exact same game. But, to the door example, Jason's Pro Builder doors are very functional and they work well, but they're not particularly
But if I was doing a YouTube video, I promise you they would not be Pro Builder doors. By the time they got to a YouTube video, I would have nice swishy animations and sound effects, and it would all be like proper fancy doors.
Yeah. So when you're about to put your game out there and tell people what you're working on, which you should be doing from the very beginning, showing people what you're working on, show them the pretty version. Take an hour or so and throw in some prettier art from the asset store or something you already have in your library and make it attractive, because even though that's not what you're not showing the scene, you're not showing the environment that you threw in, people are going to see that, and even if they don't pay attention to it, they're going to be affected by the attractiveness of the visuals and pay more attention to the actual thing you're talking about.
That was one of those really hard to learn life lessons, because as a programmer, there's nothing more disheartening than working on some really cool logical system and then saying, hey, look at this. And then you show somebody and it's like, oh yeah, no, I get it. No, you don't understand. It's got like an entire power system that does all of this stuff, and it like I can attach this to a network of 20 items, and I can have all the doors lock at once using a command. It's like, no, it doesn't. But it's not nice. It's not pretty looking. And so I've learned that, honestly, and I used to begrudge that. I used to think it's like, ugh, there's these silly artist types, they don't understand programmers and whatever. But then I admitted, whenever I look at people's GIFs on Unity3D.com and Unity 3D subreddit, I would look at it and go, I'm clicking the pretty GIFs. I mean, I'm doing it myself. And once I stopped and went, oh no, it's me too. I'm a symptom as well of the. So then I realized that it's just like, it's not about kind of placating anybody else. It's more about like ideas that are presented well are just simply going to be consumed better. And so if I was doing a video describing colors and color changing in Unity, I would pick nice colors and then I would animate the colors transitioning. They wouldn't be relevant to the topic of, again, like property blocks or whatever, but I would do that because it would make it look nice when I'm describing the topics and why they're important. So as a general rule, yeah, if you're showing somebody something, show them a vertical slice of it at its best is way more valuable than showing them the entire thing, but like not as well. You know what I mean?
Out. Yeah. Well, before we get to this next question, there was one that popped up about why there were only 46 likes. So I thought that was a good one that we should probably.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, I don't understand either. So yeah, if you don't mind though, hitting the like button, it definitely helps, even if you're like on a TV. I've gotten into the habit of that now. I think it's just from like being on YouTube so long now. Like when I watch a video, if I like it and I'm sitting there like in the living room on the TV, I go over and I'm like hitting the like button, and my wife's looking at me like I'm a lunatic. What the fuck are you doing? Like, yeah, I don't know. It's just a habit now. Like I just go hit the like button on my TV now if the video's good.
It's one of those things that when you're the creator side, you realize how valuable it is. Like every single like actually matters. But from the consumer side, you're like, it's just a button. Who cares if I click this button? Across the board, writing a comment on a video is huge. It tells YouTube that, hey, this had an impact on you. It doesn't matter what the comment is. Just write a comment if you liked a video to support the person who made that video, because that little bit is going to go such a long way into helping them get what they need to keep making that content.
And it's also like, I don't think people realize how much that, like, I've pretty much read every comment on almost every single thing I've ever been on, because I'm curious, not just from the content in terms of what people think about it, but because I consider myself an educator. And so if I get questions that are the same on multiple videos, then clearly I've not explained the topic well enough. And so I read the comments to make sure the comments are changing so that they're different relative to the information I'm giving. And so it's valuable to me if I see feedback and someone says, I don't understand that, or the opposing, which is like, I really like how you explain that. It's like, good. I now know that's a good way. That's a good metaphor to use next time I explain it. So I take all of that stuff very seriously. It's really valuable to me to know how people actually receive the information. And oftentimes it's people don't realize that. It's like, because if you get one person saying that explanation sucked, now they may just be a mean person, but like if that's the only feedback I'm getting, then that's what I'll probably assume, because there's nobody's telling me an opposing opinion, right? So I just have to go, okay, I'll try a different way next time, you know?
Yeah, the comments are super useful. And I'm the same. I read them constantly. I don't reply to them all anymore because it gets to be just too many. But I pretty much just like read them on my phone throughout the day, all the time. Whenever I'm not doing anything else, like scrolling through, like anything interesting. It is where I get a lot of the ideas for the stuff that I do, like the new videos and just the new content and stuff. Or finding parts where, like you said, I've failed to answer questions properly and keep getting the same thing popping up or something. So it's definitely useful. And I think that YouTube loves comments. Like, I think each comment's probably like 10 likes or more. Who knows?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean,
go ahead.
it just gets YouTube to show the content. I mean, really our goal is to educate people and to educate as many people as possible. Just to even if it were just educating them with entertainment or whatever. And YouTube will show our videos to more people if people are liking and clicking and commenting. It's just the math of it, So by commenting, you're basically saying, YouTube, you should show this to more people who are like me, who just commented, and then Jason or myself will get more exposure, and that exposure will just snowball into more content for everybody. It's a win-win all around. But
yeah, I agree. It's
and
good stuff.
And like I said, I don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and again, like I'm as far as I'm concerned, I'm a pragmatist. Like I don't expect. I know that every creator you watch across the platform is going to tell you to like, comment, subscribe, write things, upvotes, all that stuff, and so people can get numb to it. So I don't look at it, for myself at least, as a thing to help other people, because it gets exhausting if you're looking at it as doing 50 works of charity. Instead, look at it as a thing for yourself. If you like this content and you'd like to see it move in a different direction, comments you add are used as for people to figure out how they're doing it. So I don't treat comments as something that I'm like doing to be nice to the creator. I do it as like I like this content. I want to see the content get better. So even on fellow guys' videos here, I've left video comments going, oh, by the way, did you know you can actually do this? Or there's a way to change this thing. And I'm like trying to guide the content in a direction that makes sense that I want to see. So yeah. Just treat it like that. Treat it as a way to engage with the ideas as for yourself to get better and to improve the content you receive.
So let's see if we can catch up on some questions and just like knock out a couple of them real quick. You guys are up for it? This first one was just about whether or not you think it's possible to start game dev when you're approaching 50. And I mean, I think that it applies not just game dev, but it'd be software in general, right? Not just game dev, because it's going to be the same for enterprise software, I think, as game dev. At least in my experience, the people are very, very similar, and the industry is very similar. From a programming side, I think it's possible if you can code, if you can write the code. I mean, that's really all that matters. From design and art side, I have no freaking clue. But I mean, it's I've seen a lot of people transition into software in their 30s, 40s, and some in their 50s. Most of them seem to have a relatively easy time with it, but those are probably just the success stories who talk to me and continually communicate with me and let me know how things are going. So I know it's possible. I don't know how difficult it is as time goes on if you've never done any stuff. I think that if you've done some tech stuff, like the more tech related work you've done or more software related work you've done, the easier it is to jump into it, or the more game related work you've done. But I don't know. What do you think, Jason?
This is going to sound a bit silly, but I don't like these questions. I don't like these questions, and I also don't like the ones where there's a question in there earlier where someone was asking, can a solo first-time dev make a battle royale, or various different questions like that? Because to me, every single one of them sounds like someone saying, can someone climb Mount Everest while wearing a hat? It's like, well, those two things have nothing in common. The question is, are you going to put in the effort to climb Mount Everest? Whether you're wearing a hat, whether you're a beginner, whether you're 50, it doesn't matter. These are all, fancy differences that make no point. Whether that comes down to, if you put in the work required to do the thing you're trying to do, everything else is kind of irrelevant. So the short answer is, like, it's not about age. It's about it's easier if you're younger because you've literally got more time to dedicate to it. But if you're in a position where you have time to do it and you put in as much hours as someone who's newer to learn it, then you're in the same position they are. There's no difference. So there's nothing you can't do, providing you're willing to put the effort in to learn it. It's just a matter of, will you put the effort in? And so it's all the questions are the same. Like, and the question, the only caveat to that is, it's not that it's hard to, well, it is hard to do. It's not that it's impossible or whatever. It's more a question of scale and scope. Like, don't try to climb Mount Everest on your first try. Try to, climb a small hill. Do that first. So if the question is, can I make, it's like, can I start my own game studio at 50? Maybe, but how about you start with making your first clicker game first, then get to make your first game on the Play Store, then make your first, like, the answer is probably yes, but get started on something small, prove that works, and just move your way up. Like, there's no amount of can I X if I'm Y is a good excuse. That's just a way for you to try to justify that that's not possible. But it's all down to, if you put in the effort, it's yes is the short answer to pretty much every single one of these identical questions.
I think that's good motivational advice. Luckily, this will be recorded, so I'm just gonna have it clip that piece out and just bam, put that as a motivational video for everybody because I think it's perfect. The next question was about starting over. If you started over, would you go for a job or make a one-person gaming studio? And for me, this depends dramatically on if I get to start over knowing everything that I know now. If I start over knowing everything I know now, then I'll probably start a one-person gaming studio, buy a bunch of Bitcoin when it's cost $0 and not worry too much about it. But going back without like knowing how to code or anything again, I definitely feel like I got a huge benefit from having a job at a game company where I could learn from senior developers. I don't know that I took advantage of it initially right away, like to the full level that I wish I had. But over time, like it helped a lot, and it was great for meeting people, getting connections, but more so just for the mentorship and understanding like when I'm doing things wrong, when I'm doing things right, and seeing other people do things wrong and do things right, and having the conversations with them. So like in those environments, like when we're working at Sony and stuff, like every day, you know, you go to lunch and you're talking to programmers about the code, you're talking about these things, and like you get in that habit of just constantly talking to people. So I think it's great for growth and a lot easier than a one person gaming studio. If I just again starting off not knowing anything from scratch, right? That I would say I would definitely recommend getting the job first. But what about you? What do you guys think?
I like working for myself, and I like doing my own projects. So my general disposition would be to go back and do that. But knowing now a lot, you know, I've been self-employed for much of my life. I have a normal job now, and it's been in many ways very great to not only have a steady paycheck, but have equity in a company and, you know, free lunches. Whoa, that's not something I ever got when I was working for myself. So, you know, I think it really depends on your what you want out of it and what your situation is in life, what the circumstances of your life are. If you're able to be a one-person gaming studio and not be concerned about your retirement one day, or just your disposition is that you don't care about your retirement one day, or whatever it might be, hey, if that's what you want to do, I think you should do what makes you happy, because that's the most important thing. But for a lot of people, I think for myself, if I had to go back, yeah, I'd probably get a job out of college rather than trying out and doing my own thing for a while, because that would have given me, you know, a baseline in education, like Jason was saying, from other people who are much smarter than me, who have taught me things that I would never learn from working for myself, on just how to be in a one-person gaming studio and how to operate a one-person gaming studio, things that you don't learn unless you work in a, you know, larger studio where they have processes that a one-person gaming studio should be employing as well. And so I think it's good to have a wider array of experiences. And so for me, I'd probably start with a job and then move to a one-person studio after that.
Yeah, I'm gonna lean into metaphors again. As you can tell, I'm a fan of those a lot. I'm gonna say, from my perspective, it's like again, it's a weird question, because what you're basically saying is, imagine you have money and you're saying, should I gamble it or should I invest it? What should I do with my money? And the truth is, it depends how much money you have and whether you can. If it's to a question like, should I take a job or should I take a game studio? You're still gambling. You're just gambling with your time. And the question becomes, can you afford to? And so from my perspective, I think that just like you were saying, I learned enterprise stuff. I did enterprise work. And then I built up enough resources that I could just start messing around in Unity and turn it into a job, because I always had the backup plan. I could always go back to enterprise if I wanted to. And that's such a freeing safety net. I can do whatever I want, and I can just say, you know what? It turns out it didn't work, or I wasted money, or I did whatever. I'll just go back to enterprise. And so I'm not a risk taker, so I took the safe, boring approach. So in short, I've learned that works, and I've learned that's valuable. The one caveat to that, though, is when you're young, you do have one thing to gamble with, which is time. You can actually get away with trying a bit of it. So what I've heard a lot of people say is if you're starting out, specifically if you're like going to school or going to college and you've got your free time, you can gamble and try to make a game studio then, because you're not going to risk too much if you fail. As long as it doesn't get in the way of the rest of your life, you're not like forgoing studies or forgoing other stuff. But if you can try and do it, it's worth trying it then. So I might try to do that if I could go back in time earlier by teaching myself online and trying to do it for a year or two. And on the off chance that I roll a dice and hit a jackpot and I start a game studio, that's great. If not, I'd cut my losses, get a real job, learn how to do all of that, and then when I have the resources again, go back and try again. So in short, I would say probably should get a job, but if you have the time and you have the resources and it's not going to affect your life too negatively, maybe you can roll a dice at the start. Just try a little bit as long as it doesn't get in the way. But if you start to hit the point where it's like trying to make a studio is actively going to ruin your future chances because you're choosing not to go to college when you're given an opportunity to, that's when maybe you should reevaluate your life choices. You can always come back and put it on hold. So
yeah, I hadn't even considered the thought of restarting now where there's the internet and I could learn all this stuff. I was thinking of restarting back in the day when I had to get one book from the bookstore and try to figure out what the hell it meant.
As someone who like lived on the internet, like I've told the story many times. Like I literally had a little binder thing with 40 floppy disks in it, and I would take a bus into town, go to an internet cafe, and I would tutorials and videos and like on anything I was interested in, and I'd split it up onto the floppy disks, and I would then take the bus home, and I would then reconstitute it back at home because I didn't have internet. So, like, learn HTML and DHTML and XML and simpler stuff than the stuff I'm doing now, but I could learn it as a kid because it's just there, and there's free books in the library on how to do this stuff as well. So I just learned all of this stuff because it was there, and I look at it and I go, like, there's no reason not to try these days. There's so much ability to just grab Unity and start playing with it and put some GIFs up on Reddit, the Unity 3D subreddit, and if something gains traction, go for it. If nothing gains traction, reevaluate, go back, and then do it the same way. But at least you can try that gamble first, you know?
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, I think I wish I definitely wanted to do that back in the day. It was not a possibility. Of course, I'm old, so there were a bunch of questions. I kind of scrolled down, got lost through there, but this one stood out about dots and ECS, mostly because I've seen a couple of recent videos about it and talks about it, and it just basically not being supported in the current version of, or not being fully supported, I guess, in the current version of Unity, which I thought was a little surprising. Personally, the question was just like, if I were starting a project today, would I use it? I would only use it if I was starting a project where I really needed the performance benefits from it. Like I needed to push it and I needed to do something that I couldn't do without it. Otherwise, I would just hold off until I'm at that point. But I think that that's the case for a lot of tools. Like just try to wait and not overcomplicate my process and not add in new things, especially new beta and alpha things, unless I absolutely need them to make my project work. And for my games and pretty much every game I've ever built in the past, it's not something that I've needed to make it work. So it's not, yeah, I would say use it if you absolutely need it, but it's not something that I would use just to use. What about you? I assume you're kind of in the same boat. You're probably not using it too much on any enterprise apps or anything, right?
I wouldn't use it in 90% of cases, mostly because I just don't trust anything which hasn't been out that long. Because if people think it's about not trusting the code could be flawless, but what there isn't is a large community of people hitting all of the edge cases that can help me out. And so it's not just, you're not just paying the cost of using it, you're paying the cost of, if you want to do something that hasn't been figured out yet, you're either going to have to break ground yourself, or you're going to have to go on a big hunting expedition and find out a lot of people and find the small communities where people are doing it. So I just usually wait until features are more locked in. That being said, if the question is rather not whether I would do it, but more is it possible, the answer is 100% yes, you can. I mean, there's a guy I know, actually, we know him as well, is Jake, who's doing a game, it's called Hostile Mars, and he's doing it at the moment in ECS. It's specifically a new game coming out that's got lots of cool robots and explosions and stuff, and that's a perfect candidate for an ECS situation.
Yeah, and his game
but-
is kind of designed around pushing those boundaries and using that system to be able to push those boundaries, right?
Yeah, but to highlight the point, he has to keep reinventing the wheel, right? He's learning, like he came up with a very clever way. Well, he kind of combined a bunch of different resources online and then solved a problem of tons of explosions of how to have loads of particle systems. And that's the kind of stuff you have to do. You have to keep learning and researching, and it can be exhausting, and it can kind of detract from getting the work done if you have to spend all of this time staying on top of the technology. So it's I can honestly say I think it will be the future of Unity. I think most projects will eventually be ECS, but it'll be so long. It'll be years before that happens. So I would say until that turnover happens, like people forget, Unity used to have a plugin. Do you remember for WebGL? You have to install the Unity plugin and a separate stuff. Then it switched to HTML5. So I think a change that big will happen, and the core architecture will eventually be ECS. Just like when it switched from JavaScript to C#. Big changes like that happen in Unity. Right? Used to be Boo before that, and then and there was these changes will happen, and ECS is the next big one. It's just not mature enough yet for it to be like something I would rely on.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty solid advice. There were a couple more questions. Also, I was gonna say it would be good to have him just hop on here and talk about ECS and dots sometime.
Yeah, I guess I'd be up for that.
If you'd be up for that. Let's see. What else do we have here for questions? I don't know. Was there anything that? So there was one about continuous integration and continuous deployment. I thought this would be a good one to have Chris on and talk about. But maybe I have to. But
I will say I have. Chris may be the guy for this, but I actually specifically asked him about this last Wednesday. I specifically because I set up a system based on his advice on this. And honestly, it's really cool. I wish I'd done it sooner. You have to pay for Unity Teams. It's not super expensive. It's like $9 a month or something. But if you use the Unity cloud build stuff, what you can do is every time you make changes to your code, you commit through Collab, and Collab will automatically pick up your code, and then you can set a build target. You can actually have multiple builds. You could say one for Android, one for iOS, one for web, or whatever it is you're doing. And then when you push your code changes, it will automatically, in the background, build all of those projects and then send you an email when the link is done. Now, it might take a very long time. Like it might, for you personally to do it, it might take 10 minutes to press the build button and do it. The cloud version might take an hour because you're like, it'll be some other machine done somewhere else. And you're kind of sharing with other people. But the freedom of having it build to 3 separate platforms for every version is really handy, because not only can you get a link that you can share with people, you maintain every version. So I have projects now where it's really fun to go back a month and just like look at stuff that I have that it's like, oh look, that's what it looked like a month ago. And in the case of the most recent one, I was doing a little demo project. I think I showed you, Jason, with the start menu thing. I did like 4 versions of that, and I have like, I can look at them side by side and go, here's where it was Pro Builder cubes, here's where it was real stuff. And it's really cool being able to pull them up side by side and actually play through the game as it was X months ago. So I think the CI pipeline is great, but the way you do it is you have to go pay for Unity Teams and hook all of that stuff up. And it's, yeah, but again, I think it's well worth it. Like I would definitely I'll be using that going forward for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it seems pretty good. I've used it a bit too, and I mean, I've used external CI systems, and I know Chris has too. And the Collaborate one, they said the only downside to it is just speed, and I think that's mostly just it being queued up. Like you're queued up with a bunch of other people, so it takes a long time. Or if your project is really large, if you have a ton of art assets, I've noticed, at least in the past, it was relatively slow to sync the assets and do the build. But yeah, like just for ease of use and getting out builds constantly where you don't need an instant delivery, I think it's an awesome setup. And it's just super simple to use too. And you get all those builds and a web deployment automatically too that's playable. That was cool. Let me share your your menu thing real quick. I just wanted to show
Oh
this
yeah,
real
and
quick.
in fact, I can show you exactly what I was talking about too, because I have a version of it when it was Pro Builder Cube to show you the difference. So there's that, and then there's this, which is kind of hilariously bad in comparison. So over the space of an hour, I switched from one to the other, and it's two different builds, and I can pull up either of them, and it's kind of funny to see the difference.
Yeah, let's pull up the other one. We'll make that video as well, and we'll see the original. This is what it looked like.
Yeah,
Before.
exactly.
Oh, there we go.
It's a little different. That, you know, the basic premise was fly the camera through something and then do some little UI thing. So I was just messing about, and I thought, let's slowly make it nicer. And what's cool is I can jump between these, right? I can load up those two different versions and play with them. So it's kind of fun to see where things were. So I highly recommend some CI pipeline. You don't have to use Unity Cloud Build or whatever. It's just very easy. It's just one button. It's just so nice having a button you press. Okay. Well, yeah, just sort of version of the cloud. It's just a nice one button thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's definitely worth it, especially so you can share the thing, because you should be out there sharing it. There's another question about if it's worth building tools or your own Unity tools, I guess like in-game in-editor tools for a one-person beginner game. I guess this depends a lot. I mean, if by one-person beginner game, this is a thing where you're just kind of building it to practice, to go through like beginner development, probably not so much, right? Tools tend to be worth building when they're going to save you time or save your team time and energy, and make things faster or prevent errors. If it's not doing any of those, then it's probably not even a great exercise in tools, because it's probably just you're building tools for the sake of building tools, and they're not going to be very useful, and it's not really going to stick. So I mean, that's kind of my thought on it, but I don't know, like, what about let's talk about really quickly for like smaller games. So let's say it's a one-person studio, like a one-person game that they're building long term, and they're actually going to keep building this game for like 6 months or a year, but they're still somewhat new to it. In that case, my recommendation would be to just kind of like do it in the cases that I said. But I'm curious, like, what would you guys recommend there for tooling? You know, saying that they're going to keep this thing around, they're not just going to throw it away in 3 months, and they're going to keep working on it. Like, what kinds of things would you guys recommend are worth spending their time and energy at least thinking about building tooling for?
I would say anything that is agnostic to the project, where if you've got something that you're doing in your project and you've realized, hey, if I build this tool, it might take me a few days, but if I build this tool, it'll save me some time on this project. To Jason's point, if you're just trying to get that project done and this few days is going to delay that, and you're never going to use this again, then maybe that's a waste of your time. You'll learn a thing or two, maybe you'll learn a few tricks, but if you're never going to reuse it, then you might be spinning wheels. But if you're going to do something, whatever it is, that's going to be usable in this project, but also in this other project or another project, or maybe you're going to think, can I put this on the asset store and make a buck with it? Then, hey, now you're making something that's going to save you time now and in the future. And that's valuable, I think, because that time saved is you're going to, if you don't do it, you're going to come back to it later and you're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember when I was going to build that tool. I won't do it now. And then the next project, oh, I was going to build that tool. And each time you think of that, you're going to realize, oh, I should have built that tool a while ago. But it has to be agnostic. It has to be something that's not so specific to your one project that you can pull it out and use it in other projects over and over and over again.
Yep. There's actually a name for this. It's specifically called the Rule of Three, which states that it takes 3 times as much effort to make a tool to do something than it would to just do it yourself. And so if you want to make a tool, it should give you that much value back. You should have to use it at least 3 times as much as you would have if you were doing it yourself normally. So the kind of truth is, the hot take is that building tools is really fun. It's objectively something that you get to do this really cool thing and see stuff be automated. And that can blind you to the value you're adding. Because if you've made like an inventory system and you've got, you need inventories for your game, that's great if you're making a game and you're doing inventories, and if you want to set it as an asset. But I guess a better example is for me personally, because I've done this myself with code automation stuff or code editors, building stuff for hooking up code. Yeah, I built tools for that where I've spent months because I thought it'd be really cool if I could just click a few things in the editor and have unlimited combinations of different guns and weapons and whatever. And then I don't use it because it doesn't actually solve the problem I had. It was just something fun to make. And I had more fun making it than I did using it. And so the truth is I kind of lost the forest for the trees, So it's one of those things where I would be careful making assets if you're not going to repurpose them in some way. And if you're new, it's very hard to know the value. Like if you're selling assets on the asset store, you already know the value because you're using it yourself, and then you're going to sell it, and there's value to be added. If you're making your own game and you've got no further plans, trying to design something usable the first time is an impossible task. You don't know what you need to reuse yet. So that's why you tend to want to something. You need to have done the same thing 3 times in 3 separate projects. Stop and go, oh, this I'm going to keep doing. Now it justifies itself as a tool. So I would be careful doing it if you're not actively, if you haven't proven that it's going to get use first. So
there can be some smaller scale instances, though, I'd say, in like the same project where you're working in one bigger project. If it's just a process that you're going to be repeating, like Jason said, more than 3 times, where the time consumption there makes sense, then it can be worth automating. I like Chris has this really good chart too of like the cost of automating versus like cost of not automating. So, like the over cost, like after a week, after a month, after a year of automating like 1 second to 10 second to like 1 minute tasks and stuff, and it adds up a lot.
If you want a perfect example, that silly little door thing at the bottom, like I said, I realized I'm going to want to test multiple components. I'm going to test doors and trapdoors and turrets, and I'm going to be testing turning objects on and turning objects off. I don't want to have to make a UI for every one of these test scripts just to see some screen to play with. So I built a single automated thing which says, when given commands, draw the UI so I have buttons. That was me taking time out of getting work done to automate something because I know there's multiple use cases where this is going to come in handy later. And so something like that is perfect. That's where you're automating a repetitious task that will provide you value as you go. But again, I've done this more than 3 times to the point where I know for a fact it's going to add value because otherwise I'd be copying and pasting buttons in the inspector, which is just such an exhausting amount of time when I could just press button and say, add these 3 buttons, abracadabra, make it work, So yeah, I agree, but you have to know that it's going to add value.
Yeah, that's why you do it after instead of in advance. So a real quick question, Jason Story, do you have a YouTube channel?
No, I don't have a YouTube channel yet. I'm sorry, everyone. I keep planning to, but I get busy. I haven't gotten down to it. So.
One day.
What are you gonna call your YouTube? Is it gonna be something clever like Jason Stories or something?
Story time with Jason.
Well, okay. So technically, I do have a channel, and it is just my name. So if you do YouTube/C/Jason Story, that is my channel. It does exist. There's just no videos on it right now. As for I do have a blog though, which only has a couple of articles on it, but the blog is called Careful Coding. That's what I was naming that. The idea of being purposeful with your ideas. But
can you say that one more time? You kind of froze right in the middle of that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I have a blog called Careful Coding, which is what I like. I like the name of that because that's implying taking some thought to the stuff you're writing. There's not much on it, but I like that name. But if I was doing YouTube, it would just be my name for the most part, I think.
Yeah. And I expect one day that will fill up. You'll probably have like 10,000 subscribers and then release your first video.
Someone keeps saying that they should just go through everything all these other people's channels I'm on and just clip them and just put them onto one video channel because it's not the
channel of you on every. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, because it's one of the same thing about Discords. There's so many Discords who have written like little mini articles in line to answer questions. It's like, why don't you just make those blog posts? It's like, well, it's easier to answer a question here in line than it is to go and structure an article and plan it out and get resources, images, and whatever.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, you've definitely made enough content for a channel, so it would make sense. This next question was just about scriptable objects and obfuscation, and I guess just cheating. And I thought it was kind of interesting, and it happened to be right below the one about you having a YouTube channel. But it was just about, do they need to worry about obfuscating the scriptable object? So say they're using it for their definitions of data, like it's got their weapon damage on it or something. Do they need to obfuscate it to avoid cheating? I mean, short answer
Nice.
is like, if you really want to avoid the cheating, you probably have to do something. Obfuscating that's probably not nearly enough, though.
Unlike the other question, I actually love this question because it's one of those ones that has a lot of interesting stuff to it. But the summary is, if people want to cheat in your game, they're going to cheat. There is so many ways to cheat in terms of messing with the memory, in terms of messing with the files, in terms of messing with the data packets. Like, once you understand how to cheat in a game, there's unlimited ways to do it. You have to be practical and ask yourself, does it matter if they cheat? Now, can you make it hard enough that it's not worth cheating for 90%? And if it's a multiplayer experience, you have to make sure the cheating can't affect other players. But if people want to mess with stuff on their own computer to have fun, mess around, who cares really, right? Like, if they hack and unlock themselves the extra weapons rather than doing it the long-winded way, if that's how they enjoy your game, they're still playing your game. I'm more than happy with that, you know? So I wouldn't worry too much. The trick is less about obfuscation than it is to not allow game state to break. So there's a really cool trick you can do where even if they see the data and change it, a classic example is if I save out a text file, and the text file says you're level 10 and you've got 200 coins in the bank. If you go into that text file and say, actually, no, I'm level 20 and I've got 500 coins in the bank, I can verify that that file was changed, and then I can not allow it to be used. And so the way you do that is you can take a hash of the file and then store the hash with the file. And so when people make changes to the content, you just reload it back in, rehash it, compare the two hashes. And if they change, this file has been modified outside of your game since it was made. And that information alone is enough for you to say, I don't trust the source of this incoming file, so I'm just going to use the old one that was there. That's a more valuable thing to do. Rather than caring about trying to actually obfuscate anything, if you just manage the game state such that people aren't allowed to mess with it in easy ways, at least, that makes your life better. If they want to run a hex editor and like edit the literal memory while your game is running, you can't really stop that. And the question is, should you stop that? Again, not really. It doesn't matter. As long as it's not a multiplayer game where they can actually break the game. And if it is, there's ways to detect that too. So it comes down to what your objectives are. And I'd say, don't worry about it, especially if it's your first game or second game or third game. If it's small, like, I don't understand people wasting so much time and money running their code through code obfuscators and trying to write all of this anti-hacking stuff when it's just a fun little game that like a few thousand people will play on YouTube or Twitch or whatever. Don't waste your time.
I would imagine that there could be some benefits to people cheating and then putting those streams or videos up online, especially if something crazy happens. Like if they change it, oh no, I'm level 20 and I got 5 million coins and now I can do this and this. And if they put these streams up, I mean, you could get some new game players just by folks messing with your game and finding out some crazy things that they can do if they do kind of mess with some of the data. That could be good for you.
Yeah, 100%. Like I love watching like unofficial mods of games, right? Where people just like hack in their own stuff. It's very entertaining.
And it's nearly impossible to prevent cheating if it's a local game, if it's not online and you're not able to manage things on servers. So you can't control what people do with their memory and their code. You can just change stuff if you know what you're doing. So there was another question on cameras, and I just wanted to briefly hit it because it asked about why they're so hard since they're a part of every game. If you're not using Cinemachine, I would definitely take a look at that if you've been struggling with 3D cameras specifically. There are a lot of great tutorials on Cinemachine and just how to use it to make camera management quite a bit easier. But I mean, I don't know that. Do you think of cameras in general as something hard? I think I like getting a good smooth camera controller that like follows a character is not the easiest thing to do. Although with Cinemachine, like it's become relatively easy. But like, what do you guys think on just general thoughts on camera stuff at all. 'Cause I used to think of it as like a pain in the ass to get the camera working right and focusing right, getting it on the characters right and stuff, and doing cool things. But now it seems super simple. So thoughts?
I think cameras are hard for me as well. I mean, it's easy just to throw in the screen, but then it's a little bit more difficult to make it super customized to especially niche use cases. Cinemachine is something I have played with only a tiny bit, and I want to do more of. But I think I linked you a couple assets in the asset store, that one for 2D, one for 3D games, that I think would be valuable for anyone if you want something specific, but you won't want to get into the weeds of how to set it up yourself. This is, I think, one of those prime use cases for Unity Asset Store, where like this one, the Programmer 2D, if you're doing a 2D game, this system will just kind of make it easy. So you don't have to worry about setting up all the math behind how you want your 2D camera to move with your player. And, in the videos it's showing right now, they're just showing like, okay, there's a lot of different styles of camera movement with 2D side scroller games. And right there, there's GDC talks left and right about all these different styles and how to set them up. But this $140 plugin can kind of get all of that for you, and you don't have to worry about it. Now, if you want to learn about the cameras and really understand how to make that work yourself, then maybe do it yourself. But for a lot of folks, you don't really want to spend your time getting into the weeds about camera theory and structure and programming when you really just want to make the next Mario Brothers game.
So this, because it's actually, again, it's multiple questions. So the first part is, why are cameras so hard? Well, the short answer to that one is the reason cameras are so hard is cameras and character controllers are the two things that, all other things being equal, represent the player's input. And they're the thing that matter the most for how a person engages with your experience. A bad camera makes your game literally unplayable, and a bad character controller makes your game literally unplayable. So they're the two things that you just have to get right. And as for why is it hard to solve? Well, there's a great GDC talk specifically called 50 Game Camera Mistakes. So if you want to see a very detailed explanation about why cameras are confusing and why you have to deal with occlusion and all the different interpolations and why different ones matter, you can do that. As for the question of specifically in Unity, then it comes down to Cinemachine. Honestly, I won't use anything else anymore, because my understanding from what I've seen with games is that, like, there is so many things to consider. And if you watch that video, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's a million things to consider. And something like Cinemachine is an asset with a team with no other objective but to make a good camera. So that camera system has been battle tested to solve every single one of these scenarios and more if you know how to configure it, because its one job is to solve this problem, which, as this video, an hour worth of talking about cameras highlights, is a big problem to solve. And so you can try to solve it yourself, or you can accept the fact that somebody else has spent years of their life exclusively just thinking about cameras and made a thing that makes your life as easy as possible. And like, honestly, Cinemachine is kind of amazing with the amount of stuff it can do. Like, once you start like, if you're saying something like you should make your own camera system instead of use Cinemachine, Cinemachine literally has plugins. You can, if you can plug in not like game components, its own component system on top of the Unity component system that's specifically their own components. So you can customize Cinemachine to do whatever the hell you want. So I would say learning the complexities of how Cinemachine works and all the features you get is more valuable than starting from scratch and trying to learn these 50 things and solve them all yourself. So I think it is hard, but it's not as hard as it used to be. You do not have to make your own thing anymore. You can just use Cinemachine, learn its systems, and that'll, like, you can make almost any kind of camera you want these days. Like, it's I would honestly say Cinemachine in Unity is now a solved problem. I think it's like, just like with, we all know networking isn't a Unity solved problem, but I would say cameras are now a solved problem. If you use Cinemachine, there's very little you can't do with your camera.
That just reinforces my love for the asset too. Out of the package, I think it's definitely what people should be using. You're gonna jump onto this next one on enterprise game development, Jason? It seems like right up your alley. So, as an enterprise software engineer trying to transition into game dev, can a Unity programmer certification help since I don't have any professional game dev experience? I mean, I don't know about just that specific certification, but just certifications in general. Have you seen them be helpful for getting jobs or getting contracts or that kind of
I think
stuff?
this is one of those, like, it's kind of an age thing we were talking about before. Is like there used to be a stage where Microsoft certifications were the be all and end all, and you wanted your company to give you Amazon and Microsoft certifications and pay for you to get them and whatever. And these days, it's all about portfolios. We're talking about earlier about how the pretty stuff matters. It's far more important for you to be able to click on a link that opens up a video that has a character jumping around than 50 little icons on your profile about what different certificates you've gotten. I don't care. But if I can see something you've made, I know all the information there. And if I can ask you about it, I'll learn more from that. So when it comes to like transitioning from enterprise to game, there's no transition. Just like make code. Just Google it. Just watch videos. Do stuff like this.
They're trying to make the job jump. The job switch is really the thing. The transition.
Well, I would say, first just get good at it, and then the job stuff kind of happens. Again, I know it's I've said that a few times, and people don't like when I say that. But the truth is, if you're trying to make the job transition, you can't just like switch jobs. Like it's like saying I'm a chef and I want to start cutting wood for a living. Well, technically you can do it, but you're going to have to learn to cut wood correctly first before you get to that stage. So the truth is, just keep doing your job. Learn how to do game stuff, and then at a certain point, you'll feel confident enough that you can start doing game stuff at a professionalish level, start offering your services to people, start doing it, and then pivot in that direction. Like it's not a unique question, right? It's the same for literally anything you're doing. Learn it while you can in kind of parallel while you've got the bandwidth to do so, and then once you get good enough at it, start taking more risks until you can do it full time.
You know, what's interesting for me on this one is like I used to. Like back in the day, like I said, with the MCSEs and all the Cisco certifications and stuff, like I was all like, oh, these are huge, like a big deal. And then for the longest time, like I just kind of like lost all value in certification. I figured like most of the time, like it was always outdated stuff and didn't really matter. One of the things that caught me off guard though was when I was working at a company with non-software engineers. And they were looking at resumes and how much they pointed out things like the certification. Like they literally, I remember one time, like one of the people who was pretty high up in the company points out, like, "Oh yeah, well this one's got this the certification," and it was like one of the old Unity certifications at the time. And I was like, "Yeah, but they have no experience at all." So like, and we're not hiring a no experience position with certifications. We're hiring, you know, a senior level position. So like it didn't make a lot of difference, but it was weird to me that it stood out for other people who like just aren't very familiar. So like it may help with HR related type systems getting through those too. I don't really know. But yeah, for me it's more just like go out and apply for the job. Like certification might tell you like, hey, you were able to pass the test, you know the stuff, and maybe give you the confidence to go apply for the job, but it's probably not going to push you over the edge one way or the other. Like the most it'll do is push you past a person who doesn't know how to evaluate the rest of all your stuff, I'd say. Or give you the confidence to go apply if you're not already having that.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but would you agree that, you know, with game dev stuff specifically, since it's so easy relative to other things like enterprise software to create a game yourself, that game is your resume to be able to say, hey, I'm applying for this game dev job. Check out these games I made. They're on the store now. I made these in Unity, and I'm applying for your job making games in Unity.
Definitely the best resume, the best way to apply. Yeah. And it's something you can do it in enterprise. It's just a whole lot harder to be like, hey, I built a website that's related to your company, like with the same kind of thing you guys do, using the same stack. But with games, it's a whole lot easier. You get out there.
And what's really funny too is I've heard the argument where people say, yeah, but if someone points to their app store and they've got a bunch of games there, how do we know they didn't? Because they could have just used assets rather than like make their own camera system or make their own character controller. How do we know they actually know what they're doing? And I would say my answer to that, I always find it so funny, is you want to hire someone who can make a game, right? Well, they made a game. And if they did it by doing assets, that's exactly what you want. You want someone who knows how to use their time efficiently to make a game. You don't want, if you're specifically hiring someone to make an input system, that's a different conversation. But the truth is, you're probably instead hiring someone to solve a problem, which is, I want a character that can X. I want to do these things. And if they find a way to do it that is efficient by using assets, like if they've demonstrated that in a game, that's more than good enough for me. I don't need to know that, well, they didn't write all the code themselves. Who cares? If they can make it, then they've proven that they can make it, which means that minimum they have to know the assets enough to make the asset, you know?
Yeah, getting the job done is the most important part, and a lot of people just forget about that. I think like writing the code is the most important part. Like the lines of code you wrote are what matters, instead of the actual end result of it doing the job, is all that actually anybody cares about. Like after the commit and maybe a code review, like nobody cares about the code anymore. So there was a question on here that I'm not super familiar with, so I wanted to bring it up and see if either of you guys happen to know it, about using decentralized systems like Golem or Skynet or turn-based networking. It sounds like, is this something you guys have used before? I don't know if this is some sort of blockchain related thing or how it's working. I'm not familiar with it.
I have no idea. Yeah, Skynet makes me think of Terminator, of course. So
yeah, me too. Oh yeah, now I feel like there's something Golem versus Skynet on Reddit. I feel like something I need to learn more about. I'm very curious. Okay, well, I guess if none of us know, we'll just move on and maybe look at that next week once we have some ideas. Let's see, anything else here? Let's pull this one up. This is an art related question. So if I build an RPG with an open world, which I know somebody doing, like, what's the best way to create the world? Do they create everything in Blender and import it into Unity? Like, do they just build one big world? Do they build a bunch of little pieces? I guess kind of like, what would you recommend for that? Like putting together the actual world.
Unity. It has to be in Unity. Yeah.
So you just you're creating a bunch of assets and then pulling them all into the editor and then placing them, positioning them and stuff in Unity. And then in Blender, right, what's like the limit to the size of a thing that you put in, like would be a single model in Blender? Like if you're, say you're looking at like a castle, like how much of that castle is one model?
That's going to be completely up to the person making it. I think I've seen people make a single castle that's just one mesh, but it's a big mesh. And depending on what you want to get out of it, modularity might be more important. Like if you're going to build a castle, think about, okay, maybe you know exactly what your big open world RPG is going to look like start to finish right now. And maybe you're right, but most likely you're going to change things along the way. So if you build everything like one castle in Blender, import it onto Unity, if you need to change something, what's that workflow like now for you? Do you need to go back into Blender, redo the stuff there, re-export, reset things up in Unity, change all your stuff around that you set up in Unity to support that? Or if you build a modular castle that has, well, here's a tower, here's another thing, and then, I need to change this doorway in this tower. Oh, well, my doors is just one thing that I need to change rather than all these other things. So now you made a door that sits in the tower, which is part of a castle. So if any of those things need to change on the small scale, you're not really changing everything. You're changing one thing. Performance-wise, that's another question, I guess, but I don't think it really comes into play. I do think somebody mentioned in the comments on this question, if you're going to build the entire world, like the terrain in Blender, that's probably a bad idea. Just use the terrain tools in Unity and stuff. But in general, I would say do things, use Blender for making stuff, but put it all together inside Unity in a modular way. For your own sanity, so that in the future you can modify and update it and improve it and change it without having to go back to square one.
Yeah, and for the performance benefits, but I think reading this question a little bit more too, I just read it again. Are there do they do anything outside of Blender? So say they're building their world, right? And let's just assume that somebody watching this is pretty new to the whole process. They're building a world for an RPG. They know how to model in Blender a little bit, and they can put the things into Unity. Is there anything else that they should be kind of working into that pipeline or workflow that would make it easier, faster, just better, or something they should look at or consider in that workflow, like in between or at the beginning or the end or anywhere?
Honestly, I would just especially, if you're just starting out with this open world, start small. Expect that, yes, your final project is going to be a big open world, but what are you doing right now? And right now is likely not making a 20 kilometer by 20 kilometer world. Right now, you need a character who moves from one spot to another. So start with a small spot and then get your character moving. I think a lot of people get bogged down in, and I made this mistake when I first started too, thinking, okay, I know I want this big grand world, so I'm going to start with that. But then you get stuck realizing, wait, I just spent months working on this stuff that, one, I'm going to change because I've learned too much going, now I have to go back and fix it all. But two, I haven't coded my game yet. I don't have a game. I have a world, which a world is cool to look at. But if you're trying to make an RPG game, role-playing game, then you're going to need more than just a world. And I would start smaller and consider that before spending too much time in Blender.
Jason, you got any advice on this art pipeline and world building stuff? I think Andrew's was pretty good there. But
make it small, make it work, and then make it bigger afterwards. That's it. Like everything else is sugar on the same concept. Like the question is, how do I do art pipeline for it? Well, don't start with if you made a game first that isn't a large game yet? Well, if you haven't, make a smaller one first. Just put some rectangles down, jump on the rectangles, swap out the rectangles with something later. Don't try to create a big open world. Try to, even separately from the philosophy thing of how hard it is to do, just ask yourself, if your game isn't fun in a certain small box size, will adding more not fun make more? It's a common mistake to think, fun. Oh well, yeah, I want my game to be this really big open world fun thing. It's like, yeah, well, if it's not fun for me to walk around in the space and interact with trees or do whatever it is I'm doing at the start, then making the place 10 times larger is just going to make it 10 times more monotonous. So make the game fun in a small space before you even ask yourself how to make it big. Just make it interesting, then make it bigger.
I think that's very good advice. I've seen a lot of people struggle with that, where they just try to build something huge and never get to the fun part of the game. And then usually what happens is they just end up giving up because it gets boring, right? Like building out a world is fun at first, but it gets boring really fast. But on the topic of building it, go ahead.
I was going to say, here's the hot take on that. People often say, oh, I don't have the time or money or resources or people to make a really big, interesting game. Here's the thing. If you could make a super fun, small rectangle fun, a little room where you run around and you could pick up rocks and do powerful magic effects and do whatever you do, and then it's actually fun already in this tiny space, you'll have no problem with anything else. You can show that demo to people. You'll be able to convince artists and programmers to get on board, because if they can see it's already good and fun, they're going to want to get involved because they know it'll be successful. So if you can make something fun, you actually won't have those other problems. You will find people who will want to work with you, and you will get money, and you will find resources, because the hard part isn't the idea. The hard part isn't the size of the game. The hard part is people actually want to play. If you can learn to succeed at that, everything else is actually easy in comparison. So learn the hard part and make a small rectangle fun first.
Yep.
That's great advice. So Andrew, they got another question for you on finding someone to create art. So for anybody who's not familiar with it, Andrew runs Infinity PBR. And search for Infinity PBR, see all of his art. And he has a ton of art assets for sale, and he hires artists to make art and then makes it available to everybody through the asset store and other places. So this question seems perfect for him, right? Where do you find people to do that?
That's a good question. And it's hard. So that's actually the least favorite thing for me, is finding new people to work with. I hate doing it. It's not fun. I don't like dealing with interviewing people. I don't like dealing with, inevitably people are going to try to figure out how much you want to get paid. I know how much I can afford because I know how much I can make. And I'm, I obviously I would say this perhaps, but I'm very, I want to pay people as much as I possibly can. And, I live in an expensive area. So my ideals of what normal is probably more than many places in this world. But it's still, I get people who live in countries where I know they don't need that much money to live a good life. And they find out where I live near San Francisco and they're like, oh, suddenly they ask for like 3 times as much money. And I'm like, oh God, no, I can't pay that. Just, I've had people, one of the first people I worked with, I found him on, gosh, it's been many years, but I think I either found him at a meetup around here or something, but I booked him to do some 2D work. I was going to make a 2D game, and I ended up putting it on the asset store. And when he found out that I put it on the asset store, he was really upset because he said he would have charged me like 3 times as much. And we're like, well, I wouldn't have hired you if you had done that, but because I couldn't have paid that, and I never made that money back. So but anyways, the point is, I've used many services. I've used Unity forums, hit or miss there. I found some great people. The animator, Katie, who I've been working with for years and years now, I think 6 years. I found her on the Unity forums, and she was great. My first modeler I found on the Unity forums. He was great. He went MIA at one point when one of his games that he was working on got kickstarted, and suddenly I never heard from him again. But I've also found people who basically stole money from me. Somewhere like I agreed with someone originally to do milestone payments for some character art. After the first third, he got paid 1/3 of the money. I got a gray model that I couldn't use. And then he suddenly was badgering me for the second third when it wasn't quite ready because he had an interview in Las Vegas to go to. And I was like, no, but luckily I didn't pay him because I never got the second third delivered and I never paid him. I just lost, $700. So I've had some bad experiences there. I've not tried Fiverr yet. I've tried, for other things, I've tried, it was another similar service where you basically put out an ask and a ton of people send you some proposals and you have to choose one. Upwork? I didn't like it. What was it?
Was it Upwork?
No, but it was similar to that concept. It just did.
Like that. It's for art. I forgot what it's called, but I mind showing me that he used it for. There's also one for voice acting as well. You can do the same thing. You pay for the privilege of getting a bunch of different submissions, and you can then pick the ones you like.
Oh, yeah, kind of like 99 designs or something.
That's it. 99 designs.
I've tried to use that before, and I didn't like it either. But Upwork's been really good when I've used it in the past to find artists because the artists have portfolios, and I found that at least on there, for anybody who's trying to find artists, like the more descriptive you are and the better you give a explanation of exactly what it is you want, the easier it'll be to find people who will do a really good job at it. If you're very generic and vague, you're gonna get like a million replies from people that can't do the thing or will do something weird. If you're very specific, you tend to get really good responses.
The number one advice you can give when working finding new people. Try to find someone doing exactly what you need. Don't just try to pick an artist and get them to change styles to match what you're doing. The truth is, if you want a good-looking door, just use the theme today, then do some searches and find some good-looking doors, and then hire someone who specifically is already proven to do exactly what you're looking for. There's nothing more frustrating than asking for something that's out of their design wheelhouse, and then you'll be angry because it's not what you wanted. They'll be angry because they did the work, and then nobody actually wins. So just hire people who are actively doing the kind of stuff you like. As for how do you find those people? Well, yeah, you can use various different services like that, but I'm going to say the same answer I say to everything. Just meet people. Talk to enough people. Join enough communities. Like I know artists from communities I'm in or who I've met through friends of whatever that I would contact for needed art. And if they couldn't do it, they are artists who have friends who are artists, and I would then follow that chain and I would find somebody who reliably comes from a reference from somebody else. I very rarely would outright just go searching unless I do a Google search. I find someone who's offering to do commissions, who's doing literally what I'm looking for, and I know it's not going to be anything different than that changes. So yeah, I don't know. And as a final note as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, as a final note on that too, regarding money, never more than 50% down. Whoever you're hiring, it's a sign of respect, both sides, that if you're at maximum, but 50% to prove that you will pay them something, but don't pay the rest until of giving them no money up first. Everyone feels hard done by. So as a sign of respect, it's usually good to just accept a loss of about 30 to 50%, but at the same time, expect the other way around, right? Like you have to give and take.
So I actually I do not pay up front anymore. I just refuse to, because I've been burned too many times by folks. And so, El Sporco asked, had $1 million idea, and I would say that CG Trader does this well. CG Trader has an escrow-like system for hiring people, where you put out what you want. You put up a thing. You can hire specific people. So if you find someone that you like their work, and you're like, hey, you should apply for this because I like what you've already done, then, and then you can hire them. You communicate through their system. And in the end, if the product that is delivered is not what you asked for, you can say, hey, I'm not going to pay for this. And you can tell CG Trader, I've worked with a person, I want to cancel it and get my money back. They'll look into it and they will get you your money back. And I've straight up, I have saved thousands of dollars from this. I once tried to get a horse made there. There's plenty of really good looking horses on CG Trader. So I created the thing. I even upped the pay because I just really wanted a great horse. So I think I doubled the amount that I was really willing to pay for it, figuring, okay, I want to get it done fast. I want to get it done right. Invited a bunch of people. There was one artist with a really great portfolio of horses, delivered the horse, and it was crap. It was not at all what I expected. The textures were just kind of hand painted. There was no normal map involved in the textures. That I was like, this was like circa 2005, and he kept badgering me to finish the project so he could get paid. And I was like, no, I'm not going to pay you. And sure enough, I got my money back from CG Trader, and I was able to move on. And I've worked with other people, the people doing my low poly stuff now, all CG Trader. One guy who's I've worked with, and there's hassles working with people from online and all that. But in the end, I know, and he knows, that it's going to get done right, or nobody gets what they want. And we all end up either wasting time or losing money or time in the end. But in the end, we get the stuff done, and that escrow gives the confidence, I think, on both sides that we're legit with the process, and that we're both looking to get the right outcome.
Yeah, and I think just the caveat, because I 100% agree with that, everything you said, but it comes from the perspective of, to rephrase, it's less about paying a specific artist 50% or 30%. It's more about investing in the process of the art you're doing. In case you're paying for the process such that you've covered yourself and you're willing to pay to kind of give yourself that safety net. So I don't mean you have to specifically, like, if you hire an artist, pay them 50%, but that's obviously the way they do it in like Fiverr or whatever. But my point is, you can't go into a relationship with an artist of any kind to create something for you and not put some skin in the game, as they say. In some way, shape, or form, you need to invest in the process on your side, because when you're getting work done that's creative, there's like a million ways that can go wrong. It can go wrong from personalities. It can go wrong from the art's wrong. It can go wrong from the direction is wrong that you're giving. It could be communication. Communication. It can be, yeah. Another one is, like, realistically, people have lives too. Like, stuff happens. Sometimes people genuinely do get busy, or stuff happens, or things change. So it's one of those things that the only reason I'm saying that specifically is you can't just expect somebody to make you stuff and expect it'll work out right. If you don't at least accept the fact that it might cost you something in return. So paying into something like that, where you say, I've paid money for the privilege of being able to have a safety net with other people, is perfectly fine, as long as you're buying into the process that you will have to risk something to get something creative made. If that's a better way to phrase it, because some people think you can just, like, get tons of things for free and then pay for the ones you like. It doesn't work like that. Work still has to be done. You're going to have to pay for the privilege of exploring your own ideas.
Yeah, I still pay everybody even when I don't like the art. I'm just like, I pay them, and then if it's terrible, I just won't hire them.
I've gotten like 8 logos
okay,
on Fiverr.
I learned my lesson.
I've never used any of them, but I pay for all of them.
I would definitely say, though, I like to stick with the same people that I work with over and over. And the second part of that question was just the art style. It's very difficult for artists to match another artist's style. So having the same artist is the best way to make sure the style matches over and over. But it's not impossible. The next step would be just to find someone who can then match the same style and whatnot.
Yeah, and again, something else, an asterisk, if you find someone who makes models that are vaguely in the same style, you can also hire separately a texture artist who can make the same style of textures and apply it to multiple models. So you don't just have to find one person who can solve all of your hypothetical problems. If you find a good concept artist and then use that concept art to find a good texture artist, that texture artist can basically solve most of your problems if you get different sourced models, providing they're not vastly different because they keep the consistency. So it doesn't have to be like 5 individual people.
With that in mind, open communication between your artists that you're working with is also important, especially for models and animators. Somebody's going to rig and animate your character, but how the model is set up matters when it comes to the rigging and the animation. So that's just one more thing to consider, that, hey, maybe you're going to have a modeler from here and an animator from here, and get them in touch, get them talking to each other, so that in the end, they can answer each other's questions. And you don't have to be the middle person, and they can get from each other what they need, as if they're working in a studio, basically, even though they're different locations in the world and different services that you hired them from and all that.
Yeah. Communication tends to be the biggest problem that I've seen, or where stuff just falls apart. There was a question, we talked a lot about buying assets, but there was another question about where to get a ton of NPCs if you don't know how to make them in Blender and you don't have a lot of money to blow on models. So I guess this would be like either free or very cost effective large numbers. And I know there are at least a couple of things out there that allow you to like kind of build and generate some NPCs, but I don't know what you guys would recommend for that.
I mean, depends on where you're going. If you're just starting out and you're basically saying, hey, I've got a game, I need NPCs because that's the next system I'm working on. So I need characters to walk around that I can talk with. Honestly, does it matter yet if they all look the same? If that's the case, then use the stuff you already have. Maybe change their skin tone a little bit, or put just a red hue or a green hue on them, so oh, this one's supposed to be an elf, this one's supposed to be a orc, or whatever it might be. And, like we talked about earlier, if you make your characters separate from the models underneath the characters, then when you're ready to replace them with more bespoke models, you don't need to change the rest of the stuff that's already built. You just need to change the model and say, oh, instead of making, this animator call walk, you make that animator call walk. It's the same thing in the end. So, just use what you have. Get something from the asset store. There's plenty of packs, my own stuff, but there's also other packs that have some level of different looks involved already. So if you want some, like, oh, I want to see differences, great. Otherwise, there's things like you mentioned the character creator from Real Illusion. I hear is wonderful. I haven't used it yet myself, but I'm actually excited to use it, even though I produce humanoid characters myself. I like the idea of being able to produce, 30 different looks, so that when my game is ready to be more unique and I need 30 different models in the NPCs, I'm at that point, then I could replace my stand-in NPCs with those. So I think it really depends on where you are in the game.
Yeah.
Well,
and
what
like a broken record. It's the same thing. It's going to sound like a broken record because it's exactly the same thing. It really depends on what you're doing. If it's a hobby, then the answer is it truly doesn't matter. It can be rectangles, and you can make the whole thing will work, and you can learn it. You can go to Mixamo, grab free models. You can go grab Ethan off the asset store. It doesn't matter. It's just make it to prove that it works. If you're going to trying to turn it into a business, if you're trying to sell your game, well, then you get what you pay for. Unfortunate truth is, you're going to just have to ask yourself, if I expect this to sell and I want it to sell lots and make lots of money, I will have to put money in to make it good enough to be worth selling, to worth making money. How much money you have is entirely dependent on how much you're investing. Do you have money to buy assets versus do you have money to have assets custom made? If you can't afford to have them custom made at like 400 to 1,000 per character, then go to the asset store and buy the assets that we're talking about here. Alternatively, If you can afford to do it because you can afford to, then do it, because you'll get a better character model and you'll have a better game for it. So the truth is, the more you invest, the better it'll be. It just comes down to, can you afford to invest it? So if you're making your first game and the answer is, how do I get free whatever? Again, just use anything, literally anything, prove that it works. And if it starts to get traction, you will get the money through whatever, either a studio or investment or something, and then use that money to do it the right way and then upgrade it from there. There's no real need to sort of half it, right? Just do what works.
But so what about for like getting free characters? I can think of the asset store is one good place to just grab a bunch of free characters. I know that Open Game Art has a couple 3D characters, but not a whole lot. The Mixamo store, or like Mixamo.com,
I use Mixamo
has
a lot
like
for animations,
so characters that you can grab. That kind of a big variety, not too many in each variety, but like 4 or 5 of each different type of character at least. And then you could also just retexture those too, like Jason was saying. Whatever characters you find. But I think there are probably some other packs. Like one option, if you need a ton of things, if you can do low poly stuff, like all those low poly packs, you get like hundreds of characters for $5, because they're exactly what Jason was saying. They're just retextured. You swap out the texture, same model, save a lot of time and get a ton of variety. Do you guys think of any other sites that just have like tons of free 3D character models for anybody who just wants to go search and grab random stuff that they can throw into their game?
It's probably a bunch on, I would say, Itch, and CG Trader probably has some free stuff. I don't know. I haven't used either of them for that, but I just imagine that they would have a bunch of free resources available.
And another was that Adobe Fuse, but it's been a long time since I looked at that. I don't know if that's still around.
I thought Fuse was long dead by now.
I think that was like Mixamo was supposed to be moved into that or something.
Some new character generator thing that replaced it, though. I forget what it was called.
I don't know if they did, but I know a friend of mine uses Character Creator 3. That's by Reillusion. That's the one he uses for stuff. It's great. Okay. He can basically, now again, it's not free. You're going to have to pay about $300 to $1,000 to buy the base core set of a bunch of stuff. But when you're done, you basically get the equivalent of Andrew's assets, where it's got all the sliders for customized mesh stuff, only that on a huge scale. You can have characters with like different sized faces and bodies and eyes and pupil dilations and different textures and different clothes and different, body types, and you could all this stuff. But like, so you're paying for the modularity there. But again, that's where the investment comes in. If you're willing to pay $300 to $1,000 one time, you will get infinite numbers of relatively good looking models out of it. But you have to put in that investment to get it. And you'd have to take you're trading off the 1,000 per model that you would probably charge someone to make a bespoke model, to take your own time to go through and slide it and change it and do different stuff. So you're paying one way or another. It's just a question whether you're paying financially or with time.
That I can attest to this. So I produce the models I sell, and it costs a lot more than $1,000. The humanoids I make probably cost like $7,000, $8,000 all in. But I fully expect in the game I'm working on, the RPG I'm working on, I now expect that I will not ultimately be using my humanoid characters in my own game. In the end, for now, yes, absolutely, because I have them. They're there. They work great. They do everything I want them to do. But Reillusion's Character Creator 3 is far more appealing for those reasons. I can never produce the breadth of content that application can do. So really, as a realist, even though I would love to just keep selling my own stuff, I hope that one day my stuff is just put out of business by some really great, easier tool that everyone can get to and make use of. That being said, we started putting my wardrobe onto their store so that people can use our wardrobe in that system. Nice. And that's one of the prerequisites I'm going to be needing too, because I love my wardrobe. And the only thing I'm really going to be changing that point is not my wardrobe, but the actual base humanoid models. And so we're setting the stage for my own transition to Character Creator 3. But if you don't want to spend a few hundreds of dollars, my stuff is much more affordable, and there are free things on the asset store. So it goes back to just, hey, where are you in your process, and do you need all that yet? And if you don't, then maybe don't spend money on it yet, and wait until you actually need it to spend the money on it.
This feels very much like the kind of tool that the artists on my team would be using to make
Yeah.
things quickly, but not something that I, as a programmer or a designer, would want to want to be using like a little bit too.
And again, this kind of proves what I was saying earlier. Is I have artist friends who use this, and so I can ask them to make stuff for me. And the trade-off is I'm not asking for them to make them a bespoke thing for me. I'm just asking to use their tools to make me something good enough. And so there's sort of like a fair trade-off of now I'm only paying for their time and expertise, not paying for the actual like fully modeling process. And that's why when I said 1,000, in a lot of cases, that's just people doing that, spitting one out, and then modeling on top of it to customize a few different things. And so it's a workflow depending on who you're, and you'll often find that people who've been doing it long enough will be smart enough to like mix their workflows, half generated stuff, half their own stuff, and they'll kind of find a middle ground. Like ZBrush, a lot of ZBrush stuff, you can use a humanoid model in ZBrush and then just paint over the top of it to like add different stuff and customize it. These kind of things can really customize and optimize your workflow. Depending on if you're working with a beginner, you'll find some people make the mistake of doing everything by hand, and then you're basically paying for them to spend 100 hours, 200 hours or more doing something, when someone who's been in the industry longer will have learned that that's a waste of everyone's time, including their own, and they will start finding ways of cutting off the first half of that. So I find that there is a trade. Like, it's not always just the fact that it's cheaper. It's better. The more expensive, the better it is. You'll find that people who are working professionally at volume are actually kind of cheaper because they've learned how to be at volume at a reasonable scale that makes sense. It really depends what you're going for.
Yep. It's all about tooling and automation and making stuff faster, right? And having that experience. That's why a senior expensive programmer can often be a lot cheaper than a whole army of junior programmers. just hire one.
The other thing that people just like mistake too is like, we're talking about contractors. Contractors, just as a general rule, are just considerably more expensive than hiring staff. As a contractor, I can tell you that I'm getting more than double on average what I would expect to get if I was to go in 9 to 5. Because the trade-off is, if I go 9 to 5, I also get job security and all of the other benefits that come with that. Instead, I don't, and so I'm compensated more, and then I have to deal with my own taxes and issues and stuff on top of that. And it's like I'm paying for it in terms of my own liability and various issues from there. So the point is, if you need a model or two models, great, hire an artist on something like Fiverr or Upwork or whatever. If you're saying I'm making a game and I'm going to need thousands of unique characters and I can't just press the randomize button on something like this, well, that's where you'd hire someone. And you hire someone in-house who knows what they're doing, and then they will be cheaper because they'll be producing all of it. But again, you have to then concede that you're paying a salary. They're going to be an ongoing cost for you for the privilege of having someone that can always produce stuff for you. So that is another option too. But again, it's scale. If you don't have the need or money to have someone sit there and pump out tons of characters for you, don't do it. Just use a single character, get the game to a working state, and then make that pass later when you have the time, money, and resources.
All right, let's hit this next question because I was a little lost on it and I wanted to bring it up before it went past. It said, how would you create a 2D character customization? They currently save their character after creating it as a prefab and can't find a better solution. I wasn't completely sure what it is they're trying to ask here, and if there was some room to just push this into like prefab variants. They're trying to make some variation of it, or if they're trying to do runtime customization. I was curious if you guys can read more into it than I could.
Yeah, I think the general idea that they're kind of getting across here is that when you have a character that can be customized in tons of different ways, it can be quite expensive to have this sort of jumble of components, both in terms of performance and also effort to manage and maintain. The truth is, if it's 2D, you can often bake the result down, right? Like if it's a sprite that is used on multiple things, certain parts of it, if you separate the running body portion from the hat or the top or whatever the character's doing, and the hat can be customized with a bunch of different things on top of the hat, you could just save the resulting asset as a new asset, the hat with all of this stuff on it, and then you only have to attach that to the player, and then you've basically saved it from a performance perspective. So there's a lot of stuff like this that happens in generating games, where when you're done customizing it, it runs through a bake process of some kind. It'll save whatever you've done as a finished product. Often, like texture painters do this. If you have any of those tools where you paint on an object and draw your own stuff, it'll save all of that as a texture. So it's not like saving the changes you've made to a texture, right? It renders it to a texture and then uses that texture. So depending on the style of game and how you customize it, if it's constant active customizations, then sure, there might need to be separate objects. But if it's designing it once and then using it going forward, ask yourself what parts of this can be sort of baked down and either saved as textures or reused in some way,
Yeah. I think if your characters are, you got 10 different characters, then probably just prefabs are perfectly fine, and and variants. But if it is like a character customization where you're talking now about, the surface stuff is just going to be wardrobe, and different hats. Somebody in the hats, shoes, shirt styles, Nani Mouse said in the chat. And yeah, if you're going to do that, and there's going to be, you got 50 different hats and 100 different guns and 20 different shoes, then yes, you're not going to make a prefab variant for every single one of those, because you're going to have thousands. Instead, like we talked about earlier, your hat master parent object should be stable. That's going to be there all the time. Underneath that, though, anything can be put there. You could put a hat, you could put an upside down pot, and now that's a hat. You could put another character there if you really wanted to. Whatever you put under that hat object is arbitrary. And
that's
once
just
you
an
have
empty transform, right? Just an
empty
game
transform.
object, just a transform. You're putting it under.
Exactly. And
weapon's another great
have
example,
that,
right? You've got like a equip spot in someone's hand. You just put in a dagger or a knife or a sword or an axe, and then it'll have its own behavior. But fundamentally, it's just put in melee weapon here.
Yep. And that now allows you to create some sort of special custom, probably maybe an editor tool. I know I've done that for my own wardrobe packs that I sell, because we have tons of wardrobe and it's insanely difficult to set that up. So now we have a tool that you just predefine what you want on it. So you can say, oh, load pot hat. And then the pot hat shows up and the script takes care of removing every other hat that might already be there. So load red hat, load this hat. Once you have that, it's very easy to, call and customize the character with just one line of code. But you do have to do that custom, editor script to set up the process so that you can make use of it later.
And what a lot of people don't realize is the way this tends to work is usually some equivalent of change sets. So it may be frustrating that what you're instinctively wanting to do is save the current state of a character the way it is with all the current stuff that's on it. That's just not how things work. What you do is you save the original, you save the changes, and you apply the changes to the original. And if you want an example of this on how this happens everywhere, take Minecraft. Minecraft is this huge infinite expanding game where you're digging blocks. And you might be thinking, how does it save all of the changes? And is it saving every block I've ever touched in terms of like going through the thing? Well, the thing is, it doesn't actually save everything. It saves the things you change. It uses the same randomized seed to regenerate the same thing. So if I walk to a particular spot in the world and I dig down 3 times to make 3 squares, it only needs to save 3 squares. The location where I started changing and the 3 things I changed. And then what it does is when it goes to load that, it'll regenerate it, apply my change set on top of what was there, and then load the new changed version. So that's how you do basically all of these problems. If you've got a level where there's coins that can be collected and you want to have this whole idea of how do I manage which coins are collected, you place all the coins where you want them, the player goes through and collects them, and you save the change set. And then when you reload the level, you reload it, and then you reapply what has changed over the top of it. So the truth is that's just the universal way this stuff works, is there is a base state, changes on top. Similarly with scriptable objects. Scriptable objects will store a base state, and then if you like your default level is 1, your default health is 10. You do a whole load of stuff, changes a bunch of values, you save out the new values, and then when you load it back in, you just populate out those 2 in the scriptable object again, and you're back where you were. So yeah, you don't need to save everything. You just change the bits that save, that change from the last thing. And that makes everything smaller and easier to work with, because the work that you can offload that isn't being stored is stuff you don't have to regenerate. Now, there's differences. There's a whole problem later where something's so big, you don't want the cost of regenerating every time. So you might want to save out like a memory cache or mem state of whatever it is you're doing. That's a whole different conversation for when you don't want to do the work a second time. Like imagine if you were to generate a huge infinite Minecraft world every time, maybe you could like save out a chunk of that world that you don't have to regenerate it every time. If the trade-off is more about performance and time versus storage, but in most cases it's not. Most of us have good enough computers that the trade-off tends to be more the storage space and the speed. And so if you've only got a small change set to apply onto a pre-existing generated data, you can regenerate, apply change set very easy compared to the alternative of saving every possible change and then loading up all of that back in again.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's the concept that I plan on employing for my own RPG when it comes to saving the state of a world, of a map, including characters and all that. I know that each enemy object is going to be just a blank object, and that object will be responsible for choosing which enemy gets spawned and also where it gets spawned. I don't need to save every detail about that so that when I reload that world, it reloads. Instead, I just have to save a few key details. Which one did it? First of all, did it load yet? And if it didn't, then it doesn't matter because it's just going to do its own thing. But if it did, what did it load? And where's the position and rotation and the status of that? That's all I need to know. The rest, can be rebuilt then from that data.
In fact, you can see this because now that I've told you how it works, think about games you've played and how many times have you entered an area in a game and it stutters for a second and then like a bunch of bodies just carefully like judder or they shake on the floor because what's just happened is they've been respawned, placed, and then dropped instantly in that moment. Anytime you enter an area and collectibles shake for some reason or they sort of like rebounce or move, that's because they weren't there. What happened is when you entered the room, it went through all of the ones that it's stored as changed or added or dropped, and then it recreates them, drops them all, and puts them back into the world. So that's what change sets really are. And the real example for this for me is I see it every time in Gunfire Reborn I was playing recently, and they respawn them off the ground. So every time you an area, you like drop a load of loot and stuff and you leave, and when you come back, all the weapons are hovering on the floor and they just just land on the ground. And that's not a stylistic choice. Maybe it is, but what it's like, what's happened is they have reinstantiated all the objects and placed them just above the floor that drop down again. So like it's change sets.
I wouldn't be surprised if many games that fade in the camera over a second are doing that to hide those visuals things. That's a technique I'm going to be using in my own game.
So whenever you've got that slow transitional fade on a scene, that's not just stylistic, because the minute the game starts, you can't load it. While it's loading, you can't spawn stuff because it'll cause more jitters. So you want to wait till everything loads in, and then there's still an extra step of showing it. So how do you show it? Well, that's where you like cover the screen black and then just have it slowly fade. And then as that's happening, quickly put everything back in the right place. So yeah, that's exactly what it's doing.
That's a fog too. A lot of time, like in games, you'll have fog out there because that's where all the objects are loading. And that's how they're just hiding it, right? They're hiding it by putting it right at the edge of whatever that fog distance is. Back to old stuff. So there were a bunch more questions that popped up. I wanted to hit one that I thought was kind of interesting about like how do you make that jump from tutorials to working on your own concept? And I think that there's a step missing in there, which is the probably the most important one, which is if you're going through tutorials and you're following the process and seeing how somebody builds something and doing it and kind of understanding what you're doing along the way, it's starting to make sense. The next step is definitely not to start with your own project. The next step is to start recreating things from scratch. Start first recreating things that you've already done a tutorial on, like without going to the tutorial. Can you do it? Can you remember it? Can you get past the points where you get stuck? That's the first bit of practice. Then start doing recreations of other simple projects that are other people's existing games that you already know exactly what the entire thing looks like before you jump onto your own concept, and start practicing that, because you'll have that blank canvas experience, but you know exactly where to go. You have a reference point that you can just pull up like on a phone right next to you. You can see it side by side exactly what it's supposed to look like, and build that thing and go through that a couple times before you start trying to build your own concepts. And when you're doing that process, you'll find that like as you complete those little things that you've recreated, you're going to start introducing your own concepts into it, because that's where the fun happens. Like you start making little changes and introducing new things into it. after you've done that a few times, the idea of creating something new from scratch gets to be, I think, quite a bit easier. But I think that's a critical step there. But I don't know. You guys have any advice here?
I think you nailed it in the head. I was going to say the answer is you don't. You don't go from one to the other. In fact, the way I would approach it would be different, but the principle is exactly the same. If I had a blank slate, so I followed a tutorial. It taught me how to make Tetris. Cool. I know how to make Tetris. I now want to make some simple first-person shooter game. How do I do that? Well, the answer isn't start from scratch. The answer is start doing different tutorials. How do I gun Unity? And then you make gun Unity. How do I character jump? Then you find character jump. You're still following tutorials. You've just migrated from following a tutorial to make a project to tutorial to solve a problem. And you just do it that way. You just stack solutions. No one expects you to have the right answer for the correct way to do raycasts the first time. You have to learn it. And the way you learn it is through a tutorial. And so if you've never had a problem before, you won't know how to solve the problem. So the answer is don't blank slate. If you do blank slate it, start with a thing you want to exist. Like, I want this to explode. So you Google explode, you write the line of code that does it. You're like, cool, I get it now. Now I want it to change color. And you just repeat the cycle.
I think that's good stuff. I wanted to make sure that we didn't forget to share our tips. So if you guys are up for it, I'd like to jump into those and then get back to some more questions before we wrap up. I just want to make sure that don't actually forget to share them and run out of time. And I found a couple interesting ones that I want to share before Jason, so that he doesn't steal off my house. I know you're gonna have like a 3.5 million just awesome tips, and I've got 4 hotkeys.
You can get to yours just in case there's any overlaps. Yeah.
And I wanted to share the comment. Infinity PBR from Brackies. Miss Brackies.
Brackies was great. I sponsored him for quite a few years, and to the level where he would say, "And thanks to Infinity PBR," and so many people were like, I guess they never looked it up, but now that they see, they're like, "Oh, that's Infinity PBR." I always wondered that.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I think anybody who's used Unity in the asset store for very long probably knows what Infinity PBR is. They've seen the dragon.
I knew Andrew more from the Unite talks, because I watch literally every talk on GDC and Unite. So that's how I knew you more than the asset store, because that's like I recognized the name to a face. It's like, there we go, you know that guy.
Nice.
Yeah. So here, let me just jump in. I want to start with a couple tips that I had. So the first one was one that I basically stole from you, Jason. So, and it was about the hiding. So you know how in Unity you have that hide button in the scene hierarchy, right? Like I don't know if I can share a screen and just show it. But you can essentially hide any objects in the scene view with the hierarchy. Here, let's see. Is it that window? Did it work? Okay. Apparently I don't think it's gonna work. Whenever I click on a Unity window, it just clicks away and switches to a Chrome window. Okay, yeah, I give up on that. So anyway, it's not going to work. But the little hide option there apparently is just hotkeyed with H, which I had no idea. I never hit that hotkey. Just literally select an object and hit H, and apparently it turns it on and off. Yeah, I'm not crazy, right? What did I do? I just totally broke everything. Hold on. I think I've broken my entire editor and everything.
But it works for me. Just
there was H to highlight or hide a thing, but then the other one that was interesting was Shift H, which just hides everything else. And I've probably accidentally hit that before and freaked out and not realized that.
I'm gonna write that one
that's
down.
what was going on. Yeah, Shift H just hides all of the things except for the one that you want to focus on. So if you just want to see one thing and just use that, that's pretty freaking useful. And I found that to be like pretty handy today. I came across that one today. I was like, I did not know I could do that and just show the one thing. So I thought that one was pretty cool. There was another hotkey that came in really neat. Like, one of the things I like to do is grid snap a lot, where I hold control and move things around, but occasionally the objects get a little bit off of the grid. I did not know this, but you can hit control and backslash, the key after enter, the one like you use in a Windows directory, and it'll actually snap the object to the nearest grid spot. So whatever if it's at like 9.020, it'll jump right over to 9, and it'll do it on all 3 axes and just bounce it to the nearest grid spot. And I thought that was pretty cool. I didn't realize that that was a thing, and I had always gotten used to just going in there and typing it. And now I'm just going to get into the habit of control backslash to do that. This is a backslash, right? Or is it
that's like the V one, right? Where you hold V to snap verts. That's also the same idea. Very good.
Yeah, very similar. This one just, it takes that object and snaps it right over to whatever that closest one was. The other one I wanted to share was Control Shift A, which I'm going to just start using now, because what I've gotten into, I didn't realize what this does is it just opens up the add component window and gives focus to the editor so you can start typing and search for the component. So normally, like when I want to go add a component, I go hit the add component button and I start typing, or I drag the script over. Apparently I can just hit Control Shift A, which is like all right there with my 3 left fingers here. I just, or wherever these things are. I hit those 3, and then I can start typing in the class name and add the component. So just another little speed thing. And the last one was something that I do pretty often, which is adding a new child to an object, which is apparently just Alt-Shift-N, and it just adds an empty game object child. There's another one that adds a parent. I still don't ever use that because I just don't like the way that it repositions the things. But the adding a child I use all the time. I right click and hit game object and create a new child. Alt-Shift-N just drops it in there and speeds it up. So those were my 4, I think, useful hotkeys that I'm going to try to remember and start using regularly. And those were all of my tips. just hotkeys for the week.
So that's perfect, because one thing I never really did is I never optimized my stuff in Unity, because as I've said on many occasions, I spend 90% of my time in my text editor. I don't actually really open Unity unless it's a very Unity specific thing. And so that's like, I only knew the first couple, but those last few are new to me. All of my tips will be around the same things, but in the text editors, because that's where I spend all my time. So these are specifically for Writer, but like there is an equivalent in Visual Studio for like 90% of these. And some of them are the same. But one of them, first of all, because it bothered me, there was one I used to love in Visual Studio, which was Control MM. And what that would do is whatever section you're in would collapse. So if you're in a method, it'll drop the method. If you're in a region, it'll close the region. If you're up in the import statements, it'll shrink the import statements. So it's really nice if you're in the middle of something, you've just finished it and you want to just shrink it and then start looking around. I never knew what it was in Writer. It used to drive me insane because it used to be such an instinct I would always do. But I finally learned it's MS and ME. They're the two, open and close. So if you're at any point in your code and you want to shrink or open it, ME and MS will like do the expands. You don't have to move the mouse and click the little plus or minus every time.
So you hold it's Control M and then Control S, or
yeah,
E.
Control M and then press.
And S is...
Yeah, shrink and expand, I think. Yeah, so Control M and then either press E or S. So Control ME, Control MS. Yeah. So that one is like, I use that all the time now. That's, since I've learned that's saved that one moment I used to always have to go and reach for the mouse. Another one is just navigating more efficiently around the editor. If you just press page up, it goes up a screen level. Page down, it goes down a screen level. And if you want to navigate, if you press up, you'll navigate by line. If you press Alt up, you'll navigate by actual units, which are like the elements themselves. That one's much more useful. So if you've got like 3 variables and they're split up with lines between them, you could press up, 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 up to go through each line, or you can just press Alt up and it'll go to each one in turn. And that's just a little bit faster. And when you've got a bunch of methods and a bunch of stuff, that's a great way to move around. So those two I use a lot now. Oh, and tabs, right? If this one I didn't use before, I used to work in one file and then sort of not really think about the other files and then click between the different tabs. Just hold Alt and press left or right. Just jumps between the tabs. So if you've got multiple tabs open and you just like jump back and forth, it's so much faster. That one is something as well I never really used before. And then the one I use all the time, but so this one isn't new to me, but it's still really good, is for me it's Control T, and it just brings up the contextual search, and you can just type anything. You can just say a particular script, or in my case I use it for commits as well, because I use Writer to do all my commits. I would just write Control T commit enter, type a message, enter, and it just commits my changes. And then I could, go back to writing more code, and then Control T, type the name of the script, and wherever it is, it'll find it, open it. I start working on that script, Control T, do the same. It's just like, it's the go-to, always used one.
It's interesting. That's the same as hitting Shift twice. It's the same. I hit Shift twice to get that same pop-up. Just double tap it.
Yeah.
I was like, "What's Control T?" I was like, "Is that a different one?" It's
it's probably. I'm using I'm using the Visual Studio style for Writer, I think, because when you import it, you can choose to maintain older shortcuts. And then there's a few others that I use a lot. Those ones are sort of the main ones now that I'm really happy to have. For my test runner, I use that a lot, but that's not RM, RR. They're the other ones, which are like refactors, extract methods. Yeah, there's loads of shortcuts. It's hard to something that isn't a shortcut. This is one. I'm trying to think of things that I've seen people do slowly, which they could do faster. And the main two that tend to surprise people. It's funny. I was screen sharing code to two people over the weekend, and both of them stopped me and asked how I did something about the shortcuts. And so these are the ones I should probably talk about because they're the ones that people aren't using. One of them is you can auto expand sections in Writer by basically pre-writing a snippet of code and giving it an alias. There's a bunch of these pre-made. Like if you type CTOR and press tab, it will create a constructor. If you type PROP and press tab, it'll create a property, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and then there's FOR, F or for each, it'll create them. But what you can do is you can just make your own. There's live templates. So I have a bunch of them for things like SER writes out serialized field, or specifically, I actually write header dependencies as a specific keyword every time. Like I like to mark my dependencies at the top. So I wrote DEP now creates a header with dependencies pre-written inside the thing. Another one I do a lot is the singleton pattern. That sort of classic create a static instance and then create another one and reference it and then lazy load it. So I write singleton tab create singleton. Coroutine is another one. There's a particular coroutine I use a lot, which interpolates a value between two things. So you have a lerp, it takes in an easing curve, it interpolates the two values and then applies it. I just type COLERP, colerp, and it just does it. Now you won't have these yourself, but the point is, if there is things you write all of the time, just go into the writer settings and look at making your own live templates. Those live templates will just like make your life so much easier. Again, I have another one for unit tests. There's a particular structure I use for my test classes where I write thing underscore should. So ammo should reload or refill when I fill it or something like that. And then I would just write should tab twice, creates a whole class, adds the fixtures, adds all this stuff. And these are the things that you take for granted that you write every single time. If there's like a particular chunk of code you write, just automate it. That's a big one. A lot of people are surprised when I press a few buttons and like the default template for like 5 things just appears. To do is another one. This one I don't do. I actually think it's a bad practice, but I know a lot of people do it, so I'm going to give you the tip anyway. You shouldn't be writing your to-dos in your code. That's just not a thing. Little to-do comments for yourself is a bad idea. You should be saving those in a separate thing as like a task list or Trello or something. But if you are the kind of person who's going to write little comments saying, fix this later, add this code, do this thing, what you probably don't know is your editors actually track those for you. If you use the word to do anywhere in that sentence, or bug anywhere in that sentence, there's actually a window under the Windows tab in both Visual Studio and Writer that will actually show you every script which has a to-do in it, how many are in each page. You can click it and then link through and view them. So that's being monitored for you. So you can actually have a tab open that's your to-do lists, and it'll automatically show you all the to-dos layered out throughout all of your scripts. Again, still don't think you should do it, but if you are doing it, at least write to-do in it so that you have a window so you don't have to like search through where all your to-do lists are, you know?
Yeah. Those are interesting. I remember when I first saw that and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then I realized like, this is just littered with a bunch of stuff nobody's ever going to do. And nobody knows if they should still do it or not. Because I learned really quickly, like that is the worst thing you can check into code is some sort of a to-do list of tasks because nobody has context outside that. Drives me nuts. I wanted to share one quick writer one while you're in there, which is Control-Shift-Alt and the arrows. Which I don't know if people know, just moves the line that you're on.
Moves the elements. Oh, you taught me that. You taught me that one a while ago. I saw it in one of your videos, and I was like, that changed. That saved me, like, I'd say, honestly, hours of my life just when I saw you do that for the first time.
That one has saved me a lot. Control-Shift-Alt, up arrow and down arrow. Try it out.
Another one too.
It's great.
Yeah, yeah. Another one too. This is the one that I've seen people do, and it drives me insane. So the caret, the little cursor thing that you're using, is context sensitive. So as you move it around, you will get different feedback depending not only on what line you're on, where on the line you're on it. So make sure when you're to look around and see what you can do. For example, if you put it into an if statement, you will get the option to invert the if statement, which is so handy when you want to say, no, I want to do the opposite of this. I wrote the wrong one. You can just press a button. It'll just flip it for you. It's really nice. Similarly, I see people switch back and forth between method body syntax and property syntax. So so basically it's where you do the lambda, right? Where you have a little arrow and then the word versus the curly brackets. So you could delete the arrow, put in the curly brackets, or delete the curly brackets, put the arrow, or put the cursor in between those curly brackets, press Alt Enter and go convert to method body or convert to property syntax. It'll just do it for you. So anytime you find yourself just doing something like that all of the time, I guarantee you there's a shortcut for it. And so whatever your biggest, most common things you do are, learn them, or if they're not there, write it in yourself.
And I would add to that, in Unity, this is something I learned a while back, you can create your own shortcuts as well, and your own little editor scripts to do various things. I've written one to do screenshots, so I just press a key and it will take a screenshot. Written one to kind of just jiggle the position of an object so that I could like put something on a table and then press the shortcut key a couple times and it just moves it around randomly to get a more organic look. So I don't have to manually, oh, this looks organic. I just push this a button times and like, that's good. So you can write your own shortcuts in Unity as well. And that comes in handy for who knows the number of things you could do with it. But anything that's repetitive that you're constantly doing, whatever with your mouse or whatever with the typing, if you can automate that with a shortcut key, you could probably save quite a few minutes.
And this expands outside of Unity too. So if you find yourself pasting references of code to people a lot, like I do, if you use Share X, Share, big X, it's a replacement snippet tool that by default just does the usual capture screen region, capture screen, whatever. But what you can also do is you can capture like a GIF in a video, or what's even cooler, you can go into its settings and create jobs and tasks based on what you're doing. So you could say, when I press print screen, print the screen, but when I press control print the screen, upload it to Imgur, give me the link, put it to my clipboard, and then when I go somewhere, I can paste it. So you can just press one button, does all of that, gives you a URL, you can click it in for someone to paste to. And in my case, it does the same for Pastebin. So if I have code snippet that I'm sharing, I just highlight a piece of code and I just press a button and then it gives me a link and I can then just send someone the link. Done instantly. And the same thing goes for the reverse of that. If I want to do an image version of the code, I have a plugin in Visual Studio Code called Polo Code. And that means I can just highlight a snippet of code, press Control Alt P or Control Shift P and just type Polo Code, press enter, and it creates an image of that code that's like nicely formatted. And then I can just send them the image. So I've got ways of like sharing content that's very fast. And that's one thing I recommend you do anyway. It's very hard to get disheartened when you're doing code stuff and you're seeing stuff break and change and you have no concept of how much work you're doing. If you ever do something like make a door move, make a video out of it and post it up on Imgur so that when conversations like this happen, you have a place to look at and go, oh, look, I did do work. I made a thing. It does this. It's great for sharing, great for making conversations easier to explain. And it's also just a good motivator. I can go back and look at the last few weeks every time I made like a little video of something. So learn to make your sharing of content faster and then learn to like do that on a regular basis. That's just a general good tip. And if you start doing contract work, it's so nice being able to turn to a client and show them a bunch of progressive GIFs of stuff instantly, like, getting better over time. There's no better indication to them that you're doing work than like literally seeing it improve, Yeah.
I think for sharing code too, talking about it, I just wanted to mention GitHub's Gist setup is really nice too. Just to be able to, when you want to share some actual code with people and post that and paste it somewhere, because you can just embed it pretty much anywhere, get nice formatting, and it'll automatically format and color code for whatever language you're in. So it works great with C#, but I think it covers, I don't know, some ridiculous number of languages, probably everyone that's out there. So it's certainly
although
helpful.
On that note, there is one other small difference on that. If I'm pasting code as an example, I will paste it into Pastebin or something. But if you're pasting code to explain something to somebody, instead use .fiddle. .fiddle is a website where you can paste code and actually run it online, like even C#. So you can write C# code, like a little snippet of how to do a search or how to format a date or something, and give it to somebody as functional code that they can play with, customize, and then give it back and like work with it. So that's a much nicer way to give people code, because it means they can literally like go, oh, cool, I see what you're saying, but it doesn't do what I need, so let me tweak it. That one's just really nice. We can give someone like an actual working snippet of whatever they're trying to do.
Yeah, and that works definitely if you're doing I guess code that doesn't require a lot of context, doesn't require the editor. You're trying to show like how to solve a specific problem with a function or a smaller class. I've never used it for C# stuff. I've used it for JavaScript before, but
yeah, there's multiple fiddles. It's .NET Fiddle, or .NET Fiddle is the one for .NET stuff.
Yeah, I've used the JS one, or is it Fiddle JS or something like that? No, it's been a while.
JS Fiddle, yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Interesting. And there was a question about Corgi Engine. I think this has popped up. And it was about where did it go? Here it is. Let's find the right one. About thoughts on just people using these things like Corgi Engine or some other framework to build a game. People who are not programmers and want to go through the process of building things with some of these tools. And personally, I'm a big fan of it. I think like if you're not a programmer and the tools are there that will allow you to actually make the game and you can do it, I think it's a great thing and it's a good idea. I know some artists and not programmers, artists who've built games on their own, basically using systems like that, and they finished almost the entire thing. Almost every time, though, they end up pulling in a programmer friend to help out with the edge cases and the weird things that they get stuck on. But I think that in general, it's definitely a good idea. And if that's the best way that you're going to be able to build a game, you should definitely jump on it and just start building the game and not try to like learn a whole new set of skills just to build it if you can already do it with what's there. Yeah, I kind of think Unity is like the base level of that, right? Like all of these are just tools on top of that, and it's just how many layers you're going.
The one thing to consider on all these is how rigid different frameworks are. In some cases, they're going to be rigid to the point where it's going to be very difficult to make something custom. Like, things like Corgi Engine, my understanding, I've never used it myself. My understanding is fairly flexible. You can do a lot with it. But for some of the frameworks out there, you might not be able to do something because it's so rigid that it kind of blocks you unless you write a ton of custom code. So if you're trying to avoid writing code, then you might need to sacrifice some flexibility in the project you're working on in order to utilize a framework. But there are other frameworks out there. I know like Game Creator, I think is in this way, where the intent is supposed to be that it's much more flexible, so that while you're able to make use of different things, you don't have to make use of different things. But that itself also requires then some additional skills on coding. So, it's a trade-off, but yeah.
This is a personal point of frustration for me so if there's one thing that I do well, because people have asked, but it's a fact, I'm not that great of a programmer. I'm okay. I'm good, but I've met people so much better than I am. So but I know where my strengths and weaknesses are, and specifically, if there's one thing that's my strength, it's architecture, because that's the thing I've probably spent the most time referencing. And the problem that you're describing is the one that bothers me, is when people design an API, the problem is most people design it, which is the right way to design it. This is definitely not the wrong way, is they have a problem, they solve their problem, and they package it and they deliver it as an asset. That's like the general structure for how most people do it, because kind of how can I double dip on the thing I just made to make it a perfectly reasonable and fair thing to do. But what a lot of people don't do is they don't take the extra step after they've made it to customize it from something that worked for me to something that can work for other people. They often just dump it the way it remained roughly for how their project goes. And you can tell as you start to look through the code, and it's got things like, big blocks of commented out code and stuff, which are very frustratingly specific to whatever they were using it at the time. That's really annoying. And I do think that a lot of asset architects don't understand this problem. So the specific term for it is called, it's when the code is opinionated. It basically means that in order to use this code, you have to use it a certain way, the way it wants you to, not the way that you intend to. And there are certain assets that I really like, but their entire structure is super opinionated. Like Doozy UI is one I mentioned before. I liked Doozy UI originally, but the problem with Doozy UI is when it moved to the next one, they added tons of amazing new features, but it became really opinionated. It now requires you to do it the Doozy way. And that's where it started to lose me, because I couldn't use the parts of it I liked and I could leave the parts that I didn't. And so if you're designing an API, like, you may not think of it this way, but like, people like me, software architects, are a separate job. Like, I'm not just a programmer, I'm often an architect consultant to explain how to design stuff that is designed to be modular and consumed. And if you're trying to sell something like that, I recommend getting somebody who's more equipped to do that job, to know where to draw what are called boundary lines, such that your code will be functional and modular in different places. To really hammer home this point, I was wondering if you could share something, Jason. I've sent you a link a while back. There's an image there of some code. This just demonstrates the thing I was talking about earlier. I can resend it, actually. It's probably far back. So this is the code of the door thing I showed you earlier. Like I said, the only reason I'm bringing it up so much is because it's literally the thing on my mind, so it's the easiest reference point for me. But this is something I made, and again, as a software architect, with an eye for the fact that it's going to be, I'm going to use this different ways. So I think if you click it, it'll do the same full. You can click a little button in the bottom. If you click the, yeah, there should be a way to full screen it, because it's going to be a bit hard to see there. Yeah, either way, this doesn't matter too much. All that really matters is that this is 3 different scripts right here you're seeing. And this is my door system. So you saw the door. It was a door that opens and closes. There is a security system that registers the doors. And then there's a smart door, which is a door that is registered in that security system. These are the entire 3 scripts that sit on Unity hierarchy that do all of that work. Because I'm well aware that this is going to be something I will change and customize later. You don't want to bake in the logic of how it works. So the most important one is probably the bottom left. There's this really tiny script called Smart Door with Readout. And all this is a door which has a readout, a little panel thing on it. And it uses a handler to do that. And so I can provide different handlers for different doors. So the point isn't like specifically this code. I don't have a demo ready or scripts I could pass on, but I only bring it up to say that I wrote that with the concept of you can provide different handlers for different kinds of door things. So I know in advance that if somebody says to me, oh, well, my doors might be animated with DoTween, not using an animator like yours are, can I change that? Someone can do that without having to change the code. And that's an important distinction. Similarly, and this even goes for bigger assets too. Like, it can be very confusing if you're using something like Cinemachine and you want Cinemachine to not work with the native Unity input, but work with the new Unity input. You have to add a separate script and do modules and stuff like that. If you don't know what you're doing, that can be very confusing to do. So never write things like input.getButton into your asset that you're selling. Make a thing that has all of the functions, and then make a separate thing called Unity Input Controller for that thing, such that if somebody wants to change it up, they can. This is just a bigger rant in general. Architecture for asset developers drives me insane, because I have done regularly, bought an asset, used it for the first half of a contract, and then it won't budge past that point, and I have to go back and decide to make something from scratch to sort of resolve the problem I had, because their stuff won't do what I need to. So I guess I just wish more people who are selling code designed to be consumed would either learn or hire somebody who can show you how to make code that's easy to be consumed. That's the point for me.
Hey, you're muted, Jason. Still.
Yeah, you're still muted.
He's lost his voice.
I was stunned.
There we
silence.
go. Now you can hear me. All
yes.
Right. So again, I still didn't have anything important to say. I was pretty much just agreeing with Jason and popping up a comment. I did want to hit this last question real quick before we wrap things up, and then anything else you guys wanted to just talk about, because this is one that I have actually been doing quite a bit. And the question was about, do you use UML or any kind of diagrams for designing architecture and project architecture? For me, generally, no. I don't use UML or any auto-generated tools to reverse engineer my stuff either and look at it. What I have been using though, and I really, really like using, is that Milanote tool. I talked about it before a couple times. I think I even did a stream about it, just because it's really handy for like just designing free form architecture stuff and planning. So I use it for like both planning of like game stuff, game development, for videos, like what topics I'm going to do in the video, what videos I'm going to do. And then I also use it for code architecture. So I use it to like tie together, because I can easily represent all of my systems and then drill down into the systems and define them out. I've tried using UML diagrams and stuff in the past, and they can be nice for explaining the architecture to somebody else who's not familiar with it at all and hasn't seen it, like to bringing somebody in and giving them like some sort of an overview of how things are put together. But when it comes to actually like designing or building something, it's not very useful for me. And Milanote, like I said, has just been the most useful thing that I found, and just the most flexible. And I build really cool designs in there. And I've had a blast with it, and I blabbed about it nonstop ever since I found out about the damn thing. So.
Yeah, I use Milanote as well for mostly just for as a mood board for creative projects and things. As for the question of UML, no, I just write nonsense diagrams, just general shapes and rubbish and lines of text and rough, vaguely related dots and lines. There's no sense to it other than writing down vague notes that are in the back of my head. And earlier we talked about shortcuts. Here's all the ones I've been teaching myself over the weekend. So I've made a point of learning a bunch of them that were new to me. Yeah, so I don't take specific diagrammed notes. And if you want to be philosophical about it, not only do I not do it, I don't like that approach, because I think if you start from a top-down UML diagram approach, you're filling yourself with false confidence that the code will look and turn out the way the architecture of this thing looks. And that's just not the way it works. And even more than that, I think it's a mistake to think about your code as an architecture. Your code should read like what you're doing. So if you wanted to have an architecture for a gun, you should be having lines that say ammo goes to gun, bullet goes to ammo. Like it should read conceptually like you would expect a sane person who knows nothing about programming to read. If you start drawing service layer goes into thing with handlers and damage protocol manager, and it's like that's not going to help you. That's just gibberish, and this stuff tends to happen by design. So rather than try to design it the way that serves every purpose you might need, make a thing that does what you need, and then if something needs to change, like mentally draw a box around the thing that needs to change, take it out, give it a name, put the new thing in there, then pick another part that needs to change, take it out, and you just keep doing that. Code happens. It's not something that you should pre-plan too heavily. So, I mean, there's a difference between understanding the top layer of your architecture, but as a general rule, like it's UML and stuff is an educational tool to understand the relationships between classes in college. It is not. It helps when you maybe onboard a new person to a team and you're like, this is the current architecture we have. But it's not useful for designing. It just shouldn't be used as a tool for how things should work together.
Yeah, I think you have to make too many assumptions with it on how your code needs to work and what the best ways to interconnect are before you're actually looking at and writing the code. I do like to use the notebooks too, though, to like just double check my ideas. And like especially if I start running into a problem, if I think like I'm looking at this and like something seems a little bit off, what I'll do a lot of times is just grab a notebook, a pencil, and start diagramming out exactly where my classes are and drawing the arrows of where they're connecting with the different methods. And then suddenly like I'll do that and I'm like, oh crap, that doesn't belong there. That goes over here. That's the problem. I just need to move this over there. My whole problem is solved. And I found that can be a really handy way to do it. For not like the whole project at once, but the section that you're working on, and trying to figure out those relationships and how you want to fix them. And if there is a problem, being able to recognize what that issue is, like just drawing it out, like taking the code conceptually and putting it into these circles and boxes with lines. Huge difference.
And I find another thing that's very similar, but it's kind of more useful for me personally, is I don't so much draw boxes and diagrams as I write hypothetical code I wish existed. So I would write down on paper, thing.get other thing.set to whatever, load thing with whatever. And I would write the code that imagine if this all existed and I didn't have to write it myself. How cool would that like ideal perfect version look like? And then once you've got that down, you're like, okay, now I know what the real architecture is, the one I wish existed facing me as a person consuming my own code. So that's actually how you do test-driven development, is you start with the, like in the case of my door, the first line of code I wrote was like door.open does something. I don't know, but I would love to be able to write the line door.open and hope something good happens when that does. And then later on, I'd love to say door.lock. I don't know how it does it, but when I do that, it should do the lock thing. So I wrote the conceptual contract of what I wish existed. And then later on, I was like, what if there was a security system that I could say connect door and then security system.open all. And then what's it going to do is going to open all the doors. I don't care how that happens, but like conceptually, that's the contract that I wish existed. So rather than writing the kind of architectural guidelines, I tend to prefer to write down what would be the easiest 4 lines of code to make this happen. And then can I sort of reverse engineer that architecture design from the design of the code,
Yeah. That all sounds good to me. All right. Well, I don't know if we got anything else. We're about at noon and I hear noise coming outside. So I want to make sure that I tell everybody to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, go drop this on Facebook and Instagram or TikTok or wherever you put videos up nowadays, and just share it with everybody. And if you have things that you want to hear about, questions, comments, drop them down below right after the stream ends and the video pops up. You can just put in comments. So even if you don't have questions, just go ahead and put them in there anyway and just say hello, say hi to Jason, tell him to make a channel or whatever, just anything. And then, say thanks to these guys for popping out here too. And you guys have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, as per usual, I don't have any updates about the channel stuff, but if I ever do, that's the link it'll be on. That's so people know where I am. So if you want to follow me there, then if I ever have news, it'll go there. And of course, there's a donate button there as an option if you're interested as well.
Yeah, and I'll drop both of their links down in the description too, right below my course link that's down there too. You can check that out as well. Andrew, you got anything else?
Yeah, if you go to infinitypbr.com, we got links to my YouTube, the scripting docs tutorials. We're doing a lot on YouTube right now. We're 16 subscriptions away from 1,000. Which is a big milestone for us. So hopefully that'll happen today. We'll see.
Yeah, everybody just go over there and subscribe. Can you paste in your YouTube channel real quick? So 16 people can go subscribe real quick, knock that over the 1,000 limit. 1,000's like when YouTube starts to give you access to things and let you do the cool stuff. So everybody go hit that subscribe button.
And on ironically, like, I'm a subscriber. I genuinely like as Andrew will attest to, he's frequently working and he'll get a little ping from me saying you should do it this way. So like it's genuinely entertaining. I do recommend it.
Yeah, we do a lot on there. I've been doing live streams where I just do my work coding on the games and stuff and assets there. The guy Jim who did all the tutorials for the Bolt asset before it was purchased by Unity. He used to do all those videos. He's now doing videos with us where he's just literally taking content and making cool videos that often have nothing to do with my stuff. We like last week we premiered one that was all about using Notion to make a wiki for your game. So lots of random stuff that's just really helpful. So we're definitely basically looking to build a community and build tutorials and integrations on whatever you want us to do. I'm paying Jim, so make my money worthwhile by telling him what you want him to make, and he'll make the videos for it. So
sweet. Well, we're only one subscriber away from 1,000. Really? $9.99.
It says 1K. It says 1K.
All right, just hit it.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, we've got to 1K. Oh, now it says 998 again. So who knows? There we go. I see 1,000.
It gets one thing I've noticed with YouTube analytics is you're hitting different servers constantly. Those numbers never stay the same. Every refresh is going to change by a couple. It's based on the cache that you hit.
Actually, that does.
Well, thanks everyone. Big day.
Because people are saying it a lot, so I might as well just post this anyway, just because it's worth knowing. As I said, I don't have any videos, not yet, nothing I'm actually doing. I do actually have a YouTube channel. That's the link if you do want to subscribe on the off chance. But I do recommend it for one other reason, which is I maintain playlists. I watch, as people know, I watch lots and lots of videos. I watch hundreds and hundreds of educational stuff, and if I find something that really resonates with me, I put it on my playlists section. So if you're ever looking for something interesting on topics about game dev and whatever, check out the playlist on my channel, and then I'll hopefully add my own videos at some stage down the line.
Nice. Yeah, I just linked it too. I linked your playlist as well. I have to go through and check some of these out. I like the weird AF. It's the first one. Check that. Yeah, 639 subscribers already with no videos. 648 subscribers already with no videos. Well, thanks again, everybody, for coming out. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. Again, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff. Check out all the links below and all the stuff in chat. And we'll see you again, I guess, next Sunday. So thanks again, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.